7 years after my divorce, I stood in the lobby of a luxury hotel when my ex-husband approached with the woman who destroyed my marriage. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple dress with a cruel smirk. "Leaving you was the smartest thing I ever did," he told me. He thought I was still the broken woman he threw away. He had absolutely no idea that my new husband owned the company that was about to acquire his entire life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic ex who underestimated your worth. My name is Savannah, I am 34 years old, and I am the founder of a high-end financial consulting firm in Chicago. But tonight, I was simply a guest at a wedding. The Waldorf Astoria was buzzing with the kind of chaotic energy that only high society weddings can produce. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the imported marble floors, and the scent of expensive perfume hung heavy in the air. String music floated gently from the main ballroom, providing a sophisticated backdrop to the gathering crowd. My cousin Kevin was marrying a woman named Ashley. Under normal circumstances, I would have been absolutely thrilled to celebrate a joyful milestone with my family. However, Ashley happened to be the younger sister of my ex-husband Derek. This detail guaranteed that tonight would be anything but a peaceful family gathering. Nathaniel, my husband, had just stepped outside to take an urgent call regarding Vanguard Holdings, the venture capital firm he built from the ground up. He had offered to ignore the call, but I told him to take his time. I was perfectly comfortable standing alone near the grand staircase holding a glass of sparkling water. I wore a minimalist navy blue silk dress. It had no visible logos or flashy embellishments, but it was a bespoke piece tailored perfectly to my measurements by a private designer. I felt completely grounded and secure in who I was. The scared and shattered woman who used to shrink away from conflict was long gone, replaced by someone who knew her exact worth. I saw them before they saw me. Derek and Brittany were walking through the lobby with the kind of forced arrogance that always made me want to roll my eyes. Derek was 36 now, but he still wore the same smug, entitled expression he had when he was just a junior analyst living beyond his means. Recently, he had been promoted to a vice president position at Apex Investments, and his entire posture practically screamed about his new corporate title. I wore a tuxedo that was a little too tight around the shoulders, clearly trying to project an image of extreme wealth and superiority. Brittany walked beside him, clinging to his arm like a decorative accessory. She was 32, and her dress was a loud, heavily sequined gown that caught too much light and demanded attention from everyone in the room. Their eyes swept across the lobby and suddenly locked onto mine. I watched the initial shock of recognition wash over Derek's face, followed instantly by a look of predatory satisfaction. He leaned down and whispered something to Brittany, and her gaze snapped toward me. Her lips curled into a nasty, familiar smile. They changed their path completely, making a direct line for where I stood by the staircase. I took a slow sip of my water. I did not tense my shoulders or look away or look for an escape route. I simply stood my ground and waited for them to approach. "Well, if it is not the ghost of failures past," Derek said as he stopped a few feet away from me. His voice carried that distinct, condescending tone I had spent years trying to forget in therapy. "I am genuinely surprised they let you in here, Savannah. This is a highly exclusive event." I looked at him calmly, noting the slight sweat on his brow and the tension in his jaw. "Hello, Derek. It is Kevin's wedding. I am his cousin. I have every right to be here." Brittany stepped forward, pulling Derek's arm closer to her chest in a territorial display. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering intentionally on my unbranded dress with clear disdain. "You really have not changed at all, have you?" "Savannah," she mocked, her voice pitched loudly enough for passing guests to hear. "Still wearing plain, boring clothes. You would think after 7 years you might have figured out how to dress for a luxury hotel. But I guess some people never climb out of the gutter." She dramatically raised her left hand to brush a stray piece of blonde hair behind her ear, making absolutely sure I saw the massive, gaudy diamond ring on her finger. It caught the light from the chandeliers, blindingly bright and entirely disproportionate to her hand. I did not flinch. The old Savannah might have felt a sharp pang of insecurity or shame. The old Savannah might have looked down at her own hands or tried to justify her presence to them. But the woman standing in the Waldorf Astoria tonight knew exactly what that ring actually cost, and more importantly, exactly whose money had paid for it. "That is a very noticeable ring, Brittany," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and devoid of any reactive emotion. "It certainly matches your personality perfectly." Derek scoffed, stepping closer to me to try and use his height to intimidate me. "Do not be bitter, Savannah," he said, looking down at me with sheer disgust. "It is honestly pathetic. You show up here looking completely lost, trying to ruin my family's big day, just because you are miserable and alone. You know, seeing you right now standing here looking exactly as pathetic as the day I packed your bags makes me realize something." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, cruel whisper, so only the three of us could hear. "Leaving you was the smartest thing I ever did." The words hung in the air between us. 7 years ago, those exact words would have shattered me into a million pieces. They would have sent me running to the nearest bathroom to cry until my lungs burned. But tonight they simply sounded hollow and weak. They were the words of a man who was deeply insecure, trying desperately to convince himself of his own superiority by stepping on someone else. Brittany laughed, a sharp, grating sound that echoed slightly in the open lobby. "Honestly, Derek, it is just sad," she chimed in, adjusting her sequined strap. "She is probably hoping to find some rich man here tonight to pay off her credit card debt. Look at her standing by the stairs like a lost puppy. She is a pathetic charity case. You should just leave Savannah before you embarrass yourself further. We are hosting very important people tonight. People with actual money and real influence in this city. People you could never possibly understand or associate with." I maintained my icy composure, holding her gaze without blinking. I found it highly amusing that they assumed I was destitute, simply because I did not wear flashy designer labels to scream about my bank account balance. They were completely unaware that my firm, Pinnacle Financial Consulting, was the most ruthless and respected auditing firm in the entire Midwest. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that I had spent the last 2 months dissecting every single financial record of Apex Investments down to the last penny. And they certainly had no clue that the very ground they walked on was about to crumble beneath their expensive shoes. "I am perfectly comfortable right where I am," I replied, taking another calm, refreshing sip of my sparkling water. "But I do appreciate your concern for my social standing, Brittany. It must be exhausting working so hard to convince everyone in this room that you belong here." Derek's face flushed a deep, angry red. He did not like being challenged, and he certainly did not like his wife being subtly insulted by the woman he considered infinitely beneath him. "You need to watch your mouth," he snapped, taking another aggressive step into my personal space. "You have absolutely no idea what you are dealing with today. I am a vice president now. I have connections in this city that could crush whatever sad little life you have managed to scrape together since I dumped you. If you cause a single scene tonight, I will personally see to it that hotel security throws you out on the street where you belong." Before I could even formulate a response to his ridiculous threat, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the elegant music playing in the background. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." I did not have to turn around to know who it was. The harsh, judging tone could only belong to one person. Linda, my former mother-in-law, stepped up to join Derek and Brittany. She wore a heavy velvet gown that looked far too warm for the season, and her neck was draped in thick pearls. Her eyes raked over me with the same intense disapproval I had endured for the entirety of my brief marriage to her son. Linda positioned herself next to Derek, crossing her arms over her chest. "I heard a rumor that you managed to sneak your way onto the guest list," she announced, her voice deliberately raised, so that a passing waiter and a group of guests turning toward the ballroom could hear her. "I told Ashley it was a terrible idea. Bringing the barren ex-wife to a family wedding is just asking for a desperate scene. It is honestly embarrassing, Savannah. Are you hoping to crawl back into our lives now that Derek is a vice president?" The word barren hung in the crystal-clear air of the Waldorf Astoria lobby. It was a vicious, calculated choice of weapon. Brittany covered her mouth with a manicured hand, pretending to hide a laugh, while Derek puffed out his chest, looking incredibly pleased with his mother's arrival. They wanted to see me crumble. They wanted the tears, the shaking shoulders, the public breakdown that would justify throwing me out. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of peace. Their cruelty no longer had any power over me. But hearing Linda use that specific word transported me back to a cold, sterile hospital room 7 years ago. It brought back the exact moment my entire world had been shattered into pieces by the three people standing in front of me now. 7 years ago, I was lying in a hospital bed staring blindly at a white ceiling after suffering a devastating miscarriage at 22 weeks. My body was broken, and my heart was completely destroyed. I had called Derek from the back of the ambulance begging him to meet me at the emergency room. He never showed up. For 2 days, I sat in that hospital room alone, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, and waiting for my husband to walk through the door and hold my hand. When I was finally discharged, I took a taxi back to the house we had bought together. I was physically weak and emotionally hollow, just needing the comfort of my own bed. But when I unlocked the front door, I found Brittany sitting on my living room sofa drinking my coffee out of my favorite mug. Derek was carrying her suitcases up the stairs to our master bedroom. I will never forget the coldness in Derek's eyes when he walked back down the stairs and saw me standing there. He did not ask how I was. He did not offer a single word of comfort for the child we had just lost. Instead, he handed me a folder containing divorce papers. He told me he could not be tied down to a woman who could not even carry a child properly, and that Brittany was moving in. When I told him I would not leave my own house, Linda had walked out of the kitchen. She had been there the whole time helping Brittany unpack. Linda told me I was defective and that her son deserved a real woman. I was too weak and sick to fight them physically. I remember walking to the bank the next morning in a complete daze, planning to withdraw my half of our savings to rent a small apartment. The bank teller looked at me with pity, as she explained that the joint account had been completely drained the previous afternoon. Derek had taken every single penny we had saved while I was actively losing our child in a hospital bed. He left me with nothing. No money, no home, no husband, and no baby. Now standing in the luxurious hotel lobby, 7 years later, I looked at Linda. I saw the deep wrinkles around her eyes and the bitter tightness of her mouth. She was still the same miserable woman trying to elevate herself by stepping on my neck. I looked at Derek, who was still a coward hiding behind the women in his life. And I looked at Brittany, who was desperately clinging to a man who had already proven he would betray his wife while she was bleeding in a hospital. Linda was still speaking, clearly frustrated that I had not burst into tears. She turned to a couple standing nearby who were waiting for the elevators. "This is my son's ex-wife," she explained to the strangers, pointing a heavily ringed finger in my direction. "She is just a sad, lonely woman who cannot accept that my son upgraded to a much better family. We are just waiting for security to come and escort her out." The strangers looked extremely uncomfortable and quickly stepped into the elevator to avoid the conflict. Linda turned her attention back to me, taking a step closer. "You have exactly 2 minutes to walk out those front doors, Savannah," she demanded. "If you do not leave quietly, I will make sure everyone in this hotel knows exactly how pathetic you are. You do not belong here. You have no money, no status, and no family. You are nothing." I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the lobby smelled of fresh lilies and expensive champagne. I looked directly into Linda's eyes and allowed a genuine, relaxed smile to spread across my face. It was not a defensive smile or a forced grin to mask the pain. It was a smile of pure, untroubled amusement. "Are you quite finished, Linda?" I asked. My voice was soft, but it carried a sharp edge that made her blink in surprise. "Because if you are done reciting your little rehearsed speech, I have a wedding to attend. And I assure you I have absolutely no interest in crawling back into a family that lacks basic human decency." My calm reaction infuriated them. Derek stepped forward aggressively, placing himself between me and the entrance to the main ballroom. His face was dark with anger, and his hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. "I warned you, Savannah," he said, his voice rising in volume. "I told you what would happen if you tried to cause a scene tonight. You are not going into that reception. You are not going to embarrass me in front of my colleagues and my new bosses." He turned his head and aggressively snapped his fingers at a hotel security guard who was standing near the coat check. The guard, a tall man in a dark suit, immediately began walking toward us. Brittany crossed her arms, smiling triumphantly as she watched the guard approach. "This is going to be so satisfying to watch," she gloated. "Finally, you are going to be thrown out exactly like you were 7 years ago. Only this time, everyone gets to see it." I did not move a single inch. I stood perfectly still, watching the security guard navigate through the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. I knew that in just a few moments this entire situation was going to flip completely upside down. I just needed to be patient. I just needed to let them dig their own graves a little bit deeper. Derek pointed a finger directly at my chest as the guard came within hearing distance. I want this woman removed from the premises, immediately. Derek ordered using his most authoritative corporate voice. She is harassing my family, and she is not welcome at this event. Escort her out the front doors and do not let her back inside. I kept my eyes locked on Derek, waiting for the perfect moment. I took another sip of my sparkling water, enjoying the absolute certainty of what was about to happen next. The guard approached with purposeful strides. His dark suit blended into the sea of evening gowns, but his eyes were locked directly on me. Derek stood a few feet away, projecting the false authority of a man who believed he commanded the room. Brittany was bouncing on her heels beside him, a nasty smirk plastered across her face as she anticipated my removal. Linda watched with cold satisfaction, waiting to see me humiliated again. I let the silence stretch, allowing Derek his illusion of power. The heavy thud of the guard's shoes echoed on the marble floor as he adjusted his earpiece. "Excuse me, miss," the guard began, his voice professionally detached. "This gentleman has requested that you be escorted off the property." Derek smiled, a wide grin showcasing his absolute delight. "It is time for you to go, Savannah," he said, gesturing toward the grand revolving doors. "Please take your pathetic attempts at social climbing with you." Before I could utter a single word, a new sound sliced through the heavy tension of the lobby. It was the rapid, joyful patter of tiny footsteps sprinting across the imported marble floor. Several guests turned their heads in confusion. I did not need to turn around to know exactly who was running toward me. A rush of pure warmth flooded my chest, instantly melting away the icy armor I had worn since Derek approached. "Mommy," a bright musical voice echoed across the open space. A small figure burst through the crowd, unbothered by the towering adults. It was my 5-year-old daughter, Lily. She was wearing a beautiful midnight blue silk dress that perfectly complemented my own outfit. Her dark curls bounced as she sprinted the last few yards, launching herself directly at me. She wrapped her small arms tightly around my legs, burying her face against the silk of my dress. I immediately crouched down, ignoring the security guard and the stunned faces of my former family. I wrapped my arms around her tiny frame, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. The harsh world created by Derek completely vanished, leaving only the radiant light of my daughter. "Mommy, Dad, and I have been looking everywhere for you," Lily exclaimed, pulling back slightly to look at my face with wide, excited eyes. "Dad was on a long phone call about some boring business thing, and I told him we needed to come find you right away, because the music inside sounds so pretty." I smiled, brushing a stray curl away from her forehead. "I am right here, sweetheart," I told her, my voice soft. "I was just catching up with some old people." I stood up slowly, keeping one protective hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. I turned my attention back to the group. The sudden transformation in their pale faces was spectacular. They looked as though they had just witnessed a ghost materialize in the middle of the hotel. Derek froze, his mouth hanging open. Linda looked as if the air had been knocked out of her. Just moments ago, she had loudly broadcasted to the lobby that I was a barren ex-wife. She had wielded my past trauma like a weapon. Now a healthy, vibrant 5-year-old child was holding my hand and calling me mother. The pearls around Linda's neck suddenly seemed to be choking her as her mind short-circuited, trying to process the impossibility standing right before her eyes. They had spent 7 years convincing themselves that I was broken, defective, and entirely alone. They needed to believe that my life had stopped the day they threw me out. Seeing me standing here radiantly happy with a child completely shattered the narrative that sustained their fragile egos. Brittany was the first to recover from the shock. Her deep-seated insecurity flared up instantly, demanding that she regain control of the situation. She needed to drag me back down to the pathetic level she had assigned to me. Her initial shock morphed into a cruel, mocking sneer. "Oh my goodness," Savannah, Brittany said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "This is just getting sadder by the minute." You actually dragged a child into a luxury hotel. Derek snapped out of his trance, shaking his head to reassemble his arrogant facade. Brittany is right, he agreed, his tone shifting from stunned to deeply patronizing. Did you think bringing a kid here would stop security from throwing you out? Brittany took a step forward. Let me guess, she mocked loudly. You found some deadbeat guy who knocked you up and then ran off, leaving you to struggle. Now you are sneaking around high-end weddings, hoping to trap some rich man into paying your overdue rent and taking care of your baggage. It is honestly disgusting that you would use a child as a prop for your gold-digging schemes. Linda quickly rallied behind her daughter-in-law. I always knew you were desperate, Savannah, Linda chimed in. But this is a new low even for you. You probably cannot even afford a decent babysitter, so you dragged this poor girl into a place where she clearly does not belong. You are completely unhinged. The security guard cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable with the escalating family drama. Sir, he said, turning to Derek, would you like me to escort the lady and the child to the front exit now? Yes, Derek snapped, instantly regaining his false authority. Get them both out of here right now. I will not have my family humiliated by this struggling single mother and her desperate attempts for attention. I looked down at Lily, who was watching the angry adults with a look of mild confusion but no fear. She felt perfectly safe standing beside me. I gently squeezed her shoulder, reassuring her that everything was entirely under control. I simply let them weave their pathetic story, because I knew how incredibly foolish they were going to look in just a few seconds. You are making quite a few bold assumptions, Brittany, I said, my voice projecting calm authority over their frantic insults. I am not looking for a rich man to trap. I already found the only man I will ever need, and he is far more of a father than Derek could ever dream of being. Brittany let out a harsh bark of laughter. Oh, please, she scoffed, stepping closer and crossing her arms. If you actually had a man in your life, he would be standing here defending you, instead of letting you get thrown out on the street. Where is this imaginary, amazing husband of yours, Savannah? Is he hiding in the parking garage because the valet would not take his beat-up old car? Derek laughed along with her, shaking his head in mock pity. You are delusional, Savannah. Just take the kid and leave before I call the police and tell them you are trespassing. I smiled, a genuine radiant smile that reached my eyes. I looked past Derek, past Brittany, and past the deeply uncomfortable security guard. I focused my gaze on the grand arched doorway leading to the hotel's private executive lounge. Hi is not hiding, Brittany, I said, my voice ringing crystal clear through the quiet lobby as I watched his familiar tall silhouette step into the light. The timing was absolutely flawless. In fact, he is walking right up behind you to prove exactly who I am. The heavy silence that followed my bold declaration was absolute. Derek and Brittany spun around in perfect unison, their faces twisted in identical expressions of mocking disbelief. Linda turned much slower, her pearls clinking against her velvet gown. They expected someone weak, someone submissive who would instantly wither under their manufactured arrogance. Instead, they found themselves staring directly into the cold, calculating eyes of a man who owned the very ground they stood on. Nathaniel stepped purposefully into the warm, glowing light of the expensive crystal chandeliers. His mere presence instantly commanded the entire massive space. He stood several inches taller than Derek, carrying a quiet, lethal authority in every single movement. He wore a bespoke midnight black tuxedo that draped flawlessly across his broad, powerful shoulders. The expert cut of the dark fabric, the subtle gleam of his platinum cufflinks, and the immaculate polish of his leather shoes spoke of a level of wealth that Derek could not even begin to comprehend. Derek instinctively took a half-step backward. I watched the arrogant smirk vanish from my ex-husband's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. Brittany, on the other hand, lacked the basic situational awareness to realize she was out of her depth. She desperately needed to believe that this striking, powerful man was just a well-dressed fraud. Nathaniel moved gracefully past Derek, completely ignoring his miserable existence, and walked straight over to where I stood with Lily. A warm, genuine smile transformed his face. He leaned down and pressed a lingering kiss to my cheek. His hand rested reassuringly against the small of my back, sending a familiar wave of comfort through my body. I am sorry that took slightly longer than expected, he murmured, his deep voice wrapping around me like a protective shield. Before I could answer, Lily tugged eagerly on his pant leg. Daddy, she squealed, bouncing on her toes with boundless energy. You took forever and the music inside sounds so fun. We have been waiting right here by the stairs. Nathaniel chuckled, the sound rich and warm. He effortlessly scooped Lily up into his arms, settling her comfortably against his chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, resting her head against his shoulder. I know, sweetheart, he told her softly. I promise I am all yours for the rest of the evening. No more business calls tonight. I turned my attention back to the trio standing a few feet away. Linda's mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with shock, as she stared at the man holding my daughter. She had spent the last 10 minutes trying to convince the entire lobby that I was a destitute, barren woman begging for scraps. Now she was forced to watch this man treat me and my child with absolute adoration. Derek was visibly struggling to regain his footing. His face flushed a dark, angry red as he watched another man hold the child he had claimed I could never have. His ego could not process the fact that I had not only survived his betrayal, but had clearly upgraded in every conceivable way. He straightened his tight tuxedo jacket, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to reassert dominance. Well, Derek said, his voice artificially confident. I suppose congratulations are in order, Savannah. You actually managed to find someone willing to take on another man's baggage. He took a step toward Nathaniel, extending a hand with aggressive false politeness. I am Derek. I am the Vice President of Regional Acquisitions at Apex Investments. I assume you are Savannah's new husband. I hope she warned you about her history before you signed the marriage license. Nathaniel did not reach out to shake his hand. He simply stood there holding our daughter and looking at Derek's extended hand, as if it were something mildly unpleasant he had found on his shoe. The silence stretched out agonizingly long. Derek's hand hovered awkwardly in the air, his face growing redder by the second as the profound disrespect washed over him. Slowly he lowered his arm, his jaw clenching with barely contained fury. Wow, how incredibly rude, Brittany snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. Derek was just trying to be polite to you. I guess basic manners are too much to expect from someone. Savannah picked up. You might look nice in a rented tuxedo, but you clearly have no idea how to behave around successful people. Derek just made vice president at one of the top investment firms in the city. You should be showing him some respect, instead of standing there acting like you own the place. Linda nodded vigorously in agreement, stepping closer to her son. My son is a highly respected executive in the financial district, she added, her voice dripping with elitist pride. He is currently waiting to meet with the new chairman of Vanguard Holdings, who just acquired their entire firm. You are lucky we do not have hotel security throw you out onto the street right now for disrespecting him. The security guard, who had been standing nearby, shifted his weight nervously. He had been watching the entire interaction, and unlike Derek and Brittany, he was highly trained to recognize the subtle markers of genuine wealth and power. He took a careful step backward, clearly wanting nothing to do with throwing Nathaniel out of the building. I watched a cold, lethal smile slowly spread across Nathaniel's face. It was the exact smile he wore in boardrooms, right before he completely dismantled a rival company. He adjusted his hold on Lily, making sure she was comfortable before shifting his piercing gaze back to Derek. The air in the lobby suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Apex Investments. Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously quiet and smooth. Yes, I am actually very familiar with your work, Derek. Derek blinked, clearly thrown off balance by the response. He puffed his chest out slightly more, assuming Nathaniel was simply a low-level employee who had heard of his firm. Oh, really? Derek replied, a smug, arrogant smile returning to his face. Well, it is a major player in the market, so I am not surprised you have heard of us. What do you do exactly? Are you in middle management somewhere trying to climb the corporate ladder? If you hand me your resume, I might be able to find a junior position for you in one of our regional branches. It would certainly help you pay off whatever credit card debt Savannah has accumulated. Brittany laughed, a sharp, grating sound that echoed off the marble walls. Oh, Derek, you are far too generous to them, she mocked. They probably could not even afford the parking fee at your office building. Nathaniel did not blink. He did not raise his voice or show even the smallest trace of irritation. He simply looked at Derek with the detached clinical interest of a man studying a bad decision before deciding whether it was worth correcting. The silence stretched just long enough to make Derek shift his weight. He had expected Nathaniel to react to the offer of a junior position with gratitude or embarrassment. Instead, the man holding Lily looked almost amused. "I am not looking for a job," Derek Nathaniel replied in an easy conversational tone. "But I appreciate how quickly you evaluate people with almost no information. It tells me a great deal about the way you make decisions." Derek gave a short laugh, although the sound had lost some of its confidence. "I make decisions for a living," he said. "That is what executives do. We look at the facts in front of us and act. You are standing in a rented tuxedo beside my ex-wife at a wedding where neither of you belongs in the important circles. I do not need a full report to understand the situation." Nathaniel glanced briefly at me, and the corner of his mouth lifted. The expression was so small, Derek completely missed its meaning. Then Nathaniel looked back at him. "Interesting," he said. "At Apex, do you normally make multi-million-dollar decisions by confusing assumptions with facts?" Nathaniel adjusted Lily against his shoulder, and she rested her head comfortably against him. He looked entirely relaxed. I noticed the security guard still standing nearby, watching the exchange with growing discomfort. Derek noticed him too, and seemed to remember the authority he had tried to manufacture before Lily arrived. "Actually," Derek said, turning sharply toward the guard, "I already asked you to remove Savannah. That request still stands. Her husband and the child can go with her. They are creating a disturbance, and I am part of the bride's family." The guard looked from Derek to me, then to Nathaniel. His earlier certainty was gone. Nathaniel did not threaten him or mention a title. He simply spoke with the calm precision that made entire boardrooms stop talking. "My wife is the groom's cousin," Nathaniel said. "Our family was invited. Our names are on the guest list, and our table assignment is inside that ballroom. If there is any legitimate question about our invitation, you are welcome to verify it with the reception staff. Until then, I suggest no one mistake Derek's personal hostility for hotel policy." The guard straightened immediately. "Yes, sir," he said. "I will verify the list." He stepped away toward the reception desk before Derek could object. That tiny loss of control infuriated my ex-husband more than any shouted confrontation could have. His nostrils flared and the muscles along his jaw flexed. He looked at Nathaniel as though he was trying to force him into a category that made sense. Expensive tuxedo, calm posture, no visible fear, a child who adored him. Yet in Derek's mind, none of those facts could be allowed to mean that I had built a better life. "So what exactly do you do?" Derek demanded. "You keep talking like you understand finance. Are you some kind of consultant? Middle management? Private banking? What is it?" Nathaniel smiled faintly. "I work with capital," he said. That deliberately broad answer gave Derek exactly enough information to reach the wrong conclusion. His shoulders loosened. A smug expression returned to his face, as if he had solved a difficult puzzle. "I knew it," he said. "Finance adjacent. Probably one of those small advisory shops that rents office space by the month." "Look, I was not trying to insult you personally. You clearly do not know the history here. Savannah has always had a habit of attaching herself to people with more ambition than she has." I nearly laughed. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened, but his voice stayed level. "You have mentioned Savannah's ambitions several times tonight, Derek. That is curious. From what I know of her, she has never needed another person to carry her weight." "From what you know of her," Brittany repeated with a mocking little smile. "You have no idea what she was like when she was married to Derek. She was insecure, broke, and constantly holding him back. He had to leave her to become successful." Nathaniel's eyes moved slowly from Brittany to Derek. "Is that the story you tell yourselves?" he asked. Linda bristled. "It is not a story. It is the truth. My son rebuilt his life and became an important executive. Savannah disappeared for years and suddenly arrives tonight, pretending she belongs in the same room with people who actually matter." "People who actually matter," Nathaniel repeated quietly. "That is a revealing way to measure human beings." Linda lifted her chin. "Wealth and achievement are not crimes," no, Nathaniel said. "They are not. But confusing a title with character can become very expensive." Derek's eyes narrowed. Was that a threat? Nathaniel gave him a calm, almost pleasant smile. "No, it was an observation." For several seconds no one spoke. I could see Derek trying to decide whether to challenge him again. Nathaniel had given him nothing concrete to attack, no company name, no title, no obvious boast he could mock. That ambiguity bothered Derek because he depended on labels to decide who deserved respect. Without one, he had no idea whether to sneer or retreat. The security guard returned from the reception desk. I watched Derek brighten as though he expected immediate vindication. Their names are confirmed on the guest list, the guard said professionally. Savannah, Nathaniel, and Lily are all registered guests for the reception. I cannot remove invited guests, based solely on a private family disagreement. If there is a disturbance inside the ballroom hotel, security can respond according to policy. Derek stared at him in disbelief. I am telling you, she is going to cause a scene. At the moment, sir, the guard replied, she is not the person raising her voice. Brittany's mouth fell open. Linda made a sharp, offended sound. I had to press my lips together to keep from smiling too widely. Derek's face darkened another shade, but he was trapped. Making a larger spectacle in the lobby would only prove the guard's point. Nathaniel finally looked directly at Derek again. There is something you should understand before we go inside, he said. You have spent the last 20 minutes judging my wife by a version of her that existed 7 years ago. You have not asked what she built after you left. You have not asked who she became. You have simply assumed that because you stopped looking at her, she stopped moving forward. Derek scoffed, but the sound came out thin. I know exactly who Savannah is. No, Nathaniel replied. That is the problem. You know who she was when she was wounded and dependent on people who treated her badly. You have absolutely no idea who is standing in front of you now. Something in Nathaniel's tone made Derek hesitate. For one brief instant, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. Then his ego rushed in to protect him. He straightened his jacket and gave a dismissive smile. Whatever, Derek said. Enjoy your little mystery act. I have more important things to worry about tonight. The new chairman of Vanguard Holdings is expected at this reception, and I am not wasting another minute arguing with my ex-wife's husband. When he arrives, I have a career-defining conversation to prepare for. Nathaniel's eyes met mine for the smallest fraction of a second. The amusement there was almost impossible to hide. I lowered my gaze to Lily so Derek would not see my smile. I am sure that conversation will be memorable, Nathaniel said. Derek mistook the comment for envy. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. You should remember your place when we get inside. Men like the Vanguard chairman do not tolerate people trying to impress them with cheap theatrics. If Savannah embarrasses my family, I will make sure both of you regret coming. Nathaniel remained perfectly still. Then he gave Derek the same quiet, knowing smile that had unsettled him from the beginning. I would be very careful about making promises you may be required to keep, he said. Derek opened his mouth, but I placed my hand gently on Nathaniel's arm. I had already allowed my former family more than enough time to expose themselves. The reception was beginning, and the next stage of their downfall was waiting behind the ballroom doors. We should go inside, I told Nathaniel, my voice light and entirely unbothered. The reception is starting soon, and Kevin specifically requested that we be seated before the first toast. Nathaniel immediately softened the ice in his eyes, melting away the second he looked at me. Of course, my love, he said. He looked down at Lily, who was playing with the silk lapel of his jacket, completely oblivious to the adult warfare that had just concluded. Are you ready to go find some cake, little one? He asked her. Lily beamed a bright missing tooth smile. Yes, please, she cheered, pointing toward the grand ballroom doors. Nathaniel turned his attention back to Derek one last time. We will be having a much longer conversation very soon, Derek, he stated calmly. I suggest you spend the rest of the evening reflecting on your professional choices. Enjoy the wedding. He placed his hand firmly against the small of my back, guiding me away from the trembling trio. We walked across the marble floor, leaving Derek, Brittany, and Linda suffocating in the silent ruins of their own arrogance. I did not look back. I did not need to. The real game had only just begun, and they had absolutely no idea what I had waiting for them. The grand doors to the main ballroom finally swung open, revealing a completely breathtaking space dripping with beautiful white floral arrangements and thousands of glowing candles that illuminated the entire room. The string quartet played a lively classical piece, signaling the formal start of the reception. I walked alongside Nathaniel holding his strong arm as we followed the elegantly dressed guests slowly entering the room. Lily skipped happily ahead of us. As we approached the seating chart, elegantly displayed on a mirror adorned with gold calligraphy, I immediately noticed the blatant manipulation. However, my name had been distinctly crossed out and rewritten at the very bottom. Linda and Brittany had clearly leveraged their status to alter the arrangements. They had intentionally placed us at table 42 in the absolute darkest corner of the ballroom. We navigated our way through the maze of decorated tables, passing vibrant centerpieces and the cheerful chatter of other guests. When we finally reached our assigned table, I had to suppress a laugh. It was wedged awkwardly between a towering decorative pillar and the heavy doors that led directly into the bustling catering kitchen. It was undeniably the worst table in the entire room, clearly reserved for people they wanted to hide. Nathaniel pulled out my chair with effortless grace, his expression darkening as he surveyed our surroundings. I could see the muscle in Nathaniel's jaw ticking, a clear sign that his patience was wearing dangerously thin. He leaned down slightly, his hands resting on my chair. "Savannah, this is completely unacceptable," he said, his voice a low rumble of restrained anger. "You are a guest of honor, not an afterthought. I can make one phone call right now and have the hotel manager reassign this seating arrangement. You do not have to tolerate this blatant disrespect from people entirely beneath you." I placed my hand gently over his, feeling the tension radiating through his knuckles. I smiled, looking deeply into his dark eyes. I knew he was entirely serious about buying the hotel, and I loved his fierce protective instincts. But I did not want to stop this train wreck before it reached its final destination. "No, let them have their little victory for now," I told him, my voice brimming with anticipation. "They think they are putting me in my place by hiding me in the shadows. I want them to feel confident and untouchable. I want them to play their hands fully, because the higher they climb their imaginary pedestal, the harder the fall is going to be. Please sit with me and enjoy the show." Nathaniel searched my face for a moment before a knowing smile touched his mouth. He understood perfectly. He took his seat beside me and helped Lily settle into her chair. Lily giggled and began drawing on her napkin with the crayons Nathaniel had thoughtfully tucked into his pocket earlier. As the first course was served, the ballroom filled with the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversations. From our hidden vantage point, I had a clear view of the VIP section. Derek was holding court, gesturing expansively with his wine glass, while people nodded politely. But it was Brittany who truly demanded the attention of the room. She was unable to simply sit and enjoy her meal. Her need for validation drove her out of her seat. She began parading around the ballroom, moving from table to table with the exaggerated swagger of someone pretending to be royalty. She practically shouted her conversations, making sure her voice carried over the ambient noise. I watched her lean over a table of elderly relatives, her diamond ring flashing as she boasted about Derek's immense success. "Yes, Derek is doing incredibly well," she announced to the captive audience. "He was just promoted to vice president at Apex Investments. It is a massive firm handling billions in assets. In fact, we are expecting the new chairman of Vanguard Holdings to arrive any minute now. Vanguard just acquired the entire company, and the chairman specifically wants to meet with Derek tonight to discuss his future leadership role. It is such an important evening for us." She repeated variations of this speech at 3 different tables, soaking up the polite congratulations like a sponge. She was desperately trying to solidify her status, asserting her dominance over anyone who would listen. Her entire identity was wrapped up in Derek's corporate title and the illusion of immense wealth. Inevitably, her vanity parade brought her toward the back of the ballroom. I watched her navigate past the centerpieces, her eyes scanning the shadows until they locked onto our table. Her face lit up with a malicious, predatory joy. She could not resist the opportunity to gloat directly to my face. She strutted over to our cramped table, standing entirely too close and looking down her nose at us. "Well, Savannah, I see you managed to find your assigned seats. Brittany mocked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I was worried you might get lost in such a beautiful venue. It must be overwhelming for you. But I suppose this spot is perfect. You are out of the way, and do not have to worry about pretending to fit in with the important guests. It is very fitting. She turned her attention to Nathaniel, looking him up and down with blatant condescension. And you, she said, addressing him as if he were a slow child. It is sweet you tried to dress up for Savannah tonight. That tuxedo almost looks real from a distance. But you really should not act so tough around men like Derek. My husband is a very powerful executive who deals with billionaires daily. Nathaniel simply looked at her, resting his chin on his steepled fingers, completely unfazed by her childish taunts. Brittany took his silence as intimidation and pushed further. What do you do for a living anyway? Brittany asked, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh. You probably drive a leased Honda and worry about paying the electric bill every month. It is cute that you want to play the big protector, but you are completely out of your league here. Derek is about to sit down with the chairman of Vanguard Holdings. We are stepping into a world of wealth and power that you could never imagine. So I suggest you keep your head down, eat your free dinner, and stay out of our way. I let her finish her entire pathetic monologue. I picked up my crystal champagne flute and took a slow, deliberate sip, enjoying the crisp taste of the expensive vintage. I looked up at Brittany, maintaining relaxed eye contact. That sounds like an incredibly important meeting, Brittany. I said, my voice perfectly smooth and conversational. The chairman of Vanguard Holdings is certainly not someone to be trifled with. But tell me, are you absolutely sure that Derek's new job at Apex is secure? Acquisitions can be notoriously unpredictable. It would be a terrible shame if all that wealth and power you are bragging about suddenly disappeared overnight. Brittany stared at me for a second before bursting into a loud, theatrical laugh that grated against my ears. Her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Are you actually trying to give me career advice right now? She sneered, wiping a fake tear from her eye. That is the most hilarious thing I have heard all day. Savannah, you are a bitter, failed woman, sitting next to the kitchen in a dress that looks like it came from a discount rack. Derek's job is more than secure. He is exactly the kind of brilliant, aggressive leader the new chairman is looking for. They are going to absolutely love him. You are just jealous because your life is a complete disaster while we are swimming in money. Keep dreaming, Savannah. She spun around on her high heels, her sequined dress catching the light, and strutted back toward the VIP section, leaving a trail of heavy perfume in her wake. I watched her go, a quiet smile playing on my lips. Nathaniel reached over and gently squeezed my hand. The trap was set perfectly, and they were sprinting directly into it. Brittany was still laughing loudly, her harsh, grating cackle bouncing off the nearby structural pillars when her eyes suddenly darted downward toward our table. I watched the exact moment her gaze snagged on Nathaniel's left wrist, which was resting casually on the white linen tablecloth. He was wearing his Grandmaster chime. It was a genuine Patek Philippe masterpiece, an incredibly rare luxury timepiece worth well over $2 million. Brittany, of course, did not understand the true historical significance of the intricate dual dials or the hand-engraved rose gold casing. But she possessed the innate predatory survival instinct of a woman who had spent her entire adult life calculating the monetary value of everything around her. For a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine uncertainty crossed her face. If the man sitting right next to me was actually wealthy enough to own that watch, her entire narrative about my pathetic existence would instantly collapse. But Brittany was deeply protected by her own towering delusions. Her fragile ego simply could not allow her to believe that I had somehow secured a life infinitely better than the one Derek had stolen from me. Instead of realizing her mistake, Brittany recalibrated her reality to fit her desperate needs. In her mind, there was only one logical explanation: I was running a scam. She took a step closer to our table, her eyes practically glued to Nathaniel's wrist. Her posture shifted from mere arrogance to aggressive hostility. "Oh my gosh," she gasped loudly, slapping a hand against her chest in mock shock. "Are you actually making him wear that tonight, Savannah? I cannot believe you would go to such pathetic lengths just to try and impress my family." I folded my hands, mirroring Nathaniel's relaxed posture. "I am not entirely sure what you are talking about, Brittany," I replied, maintaining that smooth conversational tone that drove her crazy. The watch, she sneered, pointing an acrylic nail directly at Nathaniel's wrist. Do not play dumb with me. I know exactly what that is supposed to be. Derek was looking at a magazine article about those Patek Philippe watches last month. They cost millions of dollars. There are only a handful of them in the entire world. She crossed her arms, her voice rising in volume. And yet here is your new husband sitting by the kitchen doors wearing one. It is completely hilarious. How much credit card debt did you have to drown yourself in just to rent a fake watch for one night? The sheer absurdity of her accusation was almost breathtaking. She was standing in front of a self-made billionaire, accusing him of wearing a counterfeit watch because her narrow mind could not comprehend my reality. You are embarrassing yourself, Brittany, I warned her gently. I would strongly suggest you lower your voice and return to your table before you say something you will truly regret. My calm warning had the exact opposite effect. Brittany took it as a sign of weakness, believing I was desperately trying to cover up my fraudulent behavior. She noticed that my cousin Kevin and his new bride Ashley were making their rounds greeting guests at the tables nearest to us. Hey, Ashley! Brittany called out, waving her hand enthusiastically to catch the bride's attention. Kevin, you have to come over here and see this. It is absolutely priceless. Kevin and Ashley paused their conversation with an elderly aunt and walked over to our cramped table. Ashley looked annoyed by the interruption, her elaborate white gown rustling as she stopped next to Brittany. What is going on, Brittany? Brittany, Ashley asked, her tone clipped and impatient. We are trying to greet our guests. You are not going to believe what Savannah did, Brittany announced loudly, ensuring that the occupants of the surrounding tables stopped eating to listen. We all know she was furious when Derek left her for me. And we all know she has been struggling to make ends meet ever since. But she actually showed up to your wedding with a fake rich husband wearing counterfeit jewelry just to try and make us jealous. Ashley's eyes widened as she looked at Nathaniel and then down at the watch on his wrist. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting no part of this manufactured drama. Brittany, I think you should just let it go, Kevin muttered, running a hand through his hair. Let them enjoy their dinner. We do not need a scene right now. But Brittany was entirely incapable of letting it go. No, Kevin, people need to know what kind of person she really is. Brittany insisted, her voice echoing off the nearby pillars. She is fake. Look at this poor guy you dragged here. He is probably just some middle manager you met online. How much did you pay him to put on that tuxedo and pretend to be successful? She turned her vicious gaze directly onto me, her eyes filled with toxic glee. You are nothing but a pathetic gold digger. Savannah, Brittany sneered, taking a step closer so she was looming over my chair. You spent our entire marriage bleeding, Derek dry with your lazy lack of ambition, and when he finally woke up and threw you out onto the street, you realized you had nothing to offer the world. So now you are running cons. You found some guy desperate enough to go along with your charade, dressed him up in rented clothes, and brought him to a high society wedding, hoping you could trap a real rich man tonight. It is sick. It is completely disturbed. The murmurs from the surrounding tables grew louder. Several guests had stopped pretending not to listen and were openly staring at our table. Ashley crossed her arms, glaring down at me with the same disgusted expression her mother Linda had worn in the lobby. I cannot believe you would do something so tacky at my wedding, Savannah, Ashley hissed. If you were just going to cause drama and flaunt fake jewelry, you should have stayed home. You are making my family look bad. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the tidal wave of their absolute delusion. Brittany, a woman who had actively pursued a married man for his growing salary. A woman whose entire self-worth was directly tied to the brand names her husband could buy her, was loudly accusing me of being a gold digger. She could not fathom a reality where a woman built her own wealth, or a reality where a man like Nathaniel loved someone for their mind and character, rather than their willingness to be a decorative accessory. I looked at Kevin, who was staring at the floor, completely failing to defend his own cousin against his new wife's family. Then I looked back at Brittany. Her chest was heaving slightly from her loud, aggressive rant. She looked incredibly proud of herself, believing she had just delivered the ultimate public humiliation. She was waiting for me to break down to cry, to grab Nathaniel's hand and run out the back doors in shame. I reached for my napkin, carefully dabbing the corner of my mouth. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single trace of the anger that they so desperately wanted to provoke. Brittany, I said, my tone laced with heavy, genuine pity. It must be a terrifying way to live. Constantly calculating the cost of everything around you, terrified that someone else might have a little bit more. You are so blinded by your own desperate need for status that you cannot even recognize reality when it is sitting right in front of you. Brittany let out an outraged scoff, her face turning a deep mottled red. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. "You are a complete fraud, Savannah. Everyone in this room knows it. You are a cheap, manipulative liar, and this fake rental husband of yours is just as pathetic as you are." Seeing that her venom was sliding right off me without leaving a single mark, Brittany visibly tightened her jaw. She was practically vibrating with frustrated energy. When a bully realizes their primary target is completely immune to their attacks, they invariably look for a softer spot to strike. Since she could not break me, she decided to focus her toxic attention on the man sitting calmly by my side. She clearly assumed that Nathaniel was just a normal working-class guy who had been dragged into my messy life, and she figured he would be easily intimidated by her aggressive display of supposed wealth. Brittany dramatically shifted her weight, turning her back slightly toward me so she could face Nathaniel directly. She completely dropped the screeching hostility and suddenly adopted a sickeningly sweet tone of artificial pity. It was the exact kind of fake sympathy that manipulative people use when they are trying to isolate someone from their support system. "I actually feel incredibly sorry for you," Brittany said to Nathaniel, shaking her head slowly and giving him a sad pout. "You seem like a perfectly nice, normal guy who just got caught up in a really terrible situation today. You probably had absolutely no idea what you were getting into when you agreed to come here tonight. I feel like someone needs to be honest with you before she ruins your life the exact same way she tried to ruin Derek's life." Nathaniel did not interrupt her. He simply sat back in his chair, resting his arm on the table, and gave her his undivided attention. To Brittany, his silence probably looked like submission or shock. To me, it was the terrifying calm of a predator watching a very foolish prey walk directly into a trap. "You need to understand who you are dealing with," Brittany continued, her voice pitched just loud enough for Ashley and Kevin to hear every word. "Savannah is a complete parasite. She contributed absolutely nothing to our marriage. Derek worked himself to the bone trying to provide for her, and she just sat around doing nothing, draining his bank accounts and dragging him down. She is lazy, she is ungrateful, and she will bleed you completely dry the second she gets the chance. She is just using you to try and make us jealous, because she cannot stand the fact that Derek upgraded his life and married a woman who actually belongs in this kind of high-class environment." I glanced at Kevin and Ashley. Kevin was staring intently at his shoes, looking like he wanted the expensive carpet to swallow him whole. Ashley was watching Nathaniel, clearly waiting to see if Brittany's toxic warning would send this fake rental husband running for the exit. Nathaniel let Brittany's words hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. The lively music from the string quartet across the ballroom provided a stark contrast to the absolute tension radiating from our cramped corner table. Slowly, Nathaniel reached out and picked up his crystal water glass, taking a very relaxed sip before setting it back down with deliberate precision. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously low and steady. It was not loud, but it carried a rich, resonant authority that immediately commanded the space around us. "It is truly fascinating watching you perform." Brittany, Nathaniel said, his tone perfectly, even and clinical. "You throw around words like high class and wealth with such aggressive desperation. My grandfather used to say that true wealth whispers, while fake wealth screams. And right now, Brittany, you are screaming so loudly that it is actually quite embarrassing to witness." Brittany blinked, her fake sympathetic smile faltering instantly. Excuse me," she snapped, her hands dropping to her hips. Nathaniel did not raise his voice, but the temperature in our corner of the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. I was perfectly content to sit here quietly and enjoy my dinner with my beautiful wife. He continued, his dark eyes locking onto hers with unwavering intensity. "But since you have decided to stand here and offer me your unsolicited opinions about my family, I think it is only fair that I offer you a few observations of my own." He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. He looked her up and down with an entirely detached analytical gaze that made Brittany instinctively pull her shoulders back. "You talk a great deal about belonging in high society," Nathaniel observed smoothly. "But your entire presentation is a carefully constructed, highly flawed illusion. Let us start with your dress. You have been parading around this ballroom tonight, hoping everyone will assume it is a custom couture piece. But it is not. It is a ready-to-wear gown from a spring collection exactly 6 years ago. It was likely purchased at a significant discount from a secondary outlet, which explains why the heavily sequined bodice was not properly tailored to your specific measurements. If you look closely at the side seams, the threading is puckering under the tension, demonstrating a very rushed alteration job by a cheap tailor." Brittany's mouth fell open in genuine shock. A deep scarlet flush began to creep up her neck. She instinctively reached down to cover the side seam of her dress with her hand, completely verifying his precise assessment. Ashley let out a small, surprised gasp, staring at the side of Brittany's gown with newly critical eyes. "But the dress is a minor offense," Nathaniel continued, his voice remaining brutally calm and steady. "The real tragedy is the ring you keep aggressively shoving into people's faces." Brittany immediately snatched her left hand away and tucked it tightly against her chest as if she could hide the massive stone from his piercing gaze. But the damage was already done. Nathaniel had seen everything he needed to see. "You have been waving that ring around as proof of Derek's immense success and your own elevated status," Nathaniel said, leaning back in his chair again. "But anyone with even a basic understanding of fine jewelry can spot the glaring issues from 3 feet away. It is a very large stone, yes, but the cut is incredibly shallow, designed to maximize surface area rather than brilliance, resulting in that dull, glassy appearance. More importantly, the clarity is remarkably poor. Even in this dim lighting, the large carbon inclusions are visibly clustering near the bottom left prong. It is highly cloudy, which means Derek prioritized a massive carat weight over any actual quality." Brittany was shaking, now her face burning with a mixture of profound humiliation and intense rage. "Shut up," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You have no idea what you are talking about. It is custom made. It is set in a cheap 14-karat white gold alloy that is already beginning to tarnish around the base," Nathaniel countered effortlessly, ignoring her outburst entirely. "A genuine high-quality stone of that size would be exclusively set in pure platinum to protect the investment. Derek bought you a highly flawed discount diamond to stroke his own fragile ego, and you are parading it around like it is a crown jewel. It is the perfect metaphor for your entire marriage, Brittany. It is loud, it is deeply flawed, and it is ultimately entirely worthless." The silence that fell over our small corner was absolutely deafening. Kevin was staring at Nathaniel with wide, terrified eyes. Ashley was looking at Brittany with a mixture of pity and clear disgust, realizing that her new sister-in-law was standing there wearing a cheap, discounted ring and a 6-year-old outlet dress. Brittany looked like she was going to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved and her eyes darted frantically around, hoping that no one else had heard Nathaniel's surgical dismantling of her entire curated identity. "She had come over to our table to humiliate me, to expose my husband as a fake, and to assert her dominance. Instead, she had been completely and thoroughly stripped of her pretentious armor in front of the bride and groom." Nathaniel held her panicked gaze, his expression completely unreadable. He leaned forward just a few inches, lowering his voice so that only Brittany could hear the final devastating blow. "You came over here to warn me about my wife." Nathaniel whispered, his tone sending a visible shiver down Brittany's spine. "But the truth is, you have absolutely no idea who you are speaking to, do you? You have no concept of the power standing in front of you tonight. So I strongly suggest you turn around, walk back to your husband, and enjoy the rest of your cheap sparkling wine before I decide to truly make an example out of you." Brittany was completely incapable of forming a coherent sentence. Her mouth opened and closed silently several times. The aggressive, arrogant woman who had marched over to our table was entirely gone, replaced by a humiliated, terrified imposter. She spun around on her wobbling heels, nearly tripping over the hem of her outdated dress, and stormed away from our table as fast as her legs could carry her. She pushed past a waiter, ignoring his startled apology, and practically ran back toward the safety of the VIP section. Kevin and Ashley stood frozen for a moment longer. Kevin offered a quick, awkward nod in our direction before grabbing Ashley's arm and quickly steering his new bride away toward the opposite side of the ballroom, wanting nothing to do with the fallout. I sat back in my chair looking at the man sitting beside me with profound admiration. Nathaniel picked up his water glass, taking another calm sip, as if he had just finished reading a mildly interesting newspaper article rather than completely destroying a woman's entire manufactured reality. He turned his head and offered me a small, devastatingly handsome smile. I returned the smile, feeling the anticipation building in my chest. The social games were finally over, and the real destruction was about to begin. The social games should have ended there, but Derek was far too frightened by Nathaniel's confidence to leave the matter alone. For the next several minutes, I watched him from across the ballroom while Nathaniel and I finished our drinks. Derek pretended to listen to conversations at the VIP tables, but his eyes kept returning to our corner. Every time Nathaniel leaned toward me or smiled at Lily, I saw another flash of irritation cross my ex-husband's face. He needed to know who Nathaniel was, and more importantly, he needed me gone before the mysterious Vanguard chairman arrived. A waiter passed our table carrying a tray of drinks, and Nathaniel glanced toward the bar. "I am going to get Lily some water and see whether they have anything without citrus," he said quietly. She had recently decided that every lemon slice was personally offensive. He kissed my temple, then stood. Lily was busy coloring beside me and barely looked up. I watched Nathaniel cross the ballroom and stop near the polished bar. The moment he was 10 yards away, Derek moved. He detached himself from the VIP group with the stiff determination of someone who had been waiting for an opening. He came straight toward my table without Brittany or Linda. His smile was gone. The smug performance he used in public had been replaced by something colder and more desperate. "We need to talk," he said. I looked at the empty chair across from me. "I think you have already done enough talking for one evening." Derek ignored that. He pulled out the chair and sat without being invited. His gaze flicked toward Nathaniel at the bar, then back to me. "Listen carefully, Savannah. I do not care what game you are playing with that man. I do not care how much you paid for the tuxedo or the watch or whatever story you convinced him to tell. You are going to leave this reception before the chairman of Vanguard Holdings arrives." I rested one hand beside my clutch. Inside it, my phone was already unlocked. Derek had always become careless when he believed he had leverage. I slid the phone beneath the folded edge of my napkin and touched the recording icon with my thumb. "Why would I leave my cousin's wedding?" I asked. "Because I am not letting you destroy the most important night of my career," he snapped. "The chairman is supposed to make a surprise appearance. Charles told senior leadership to be prepared. This acquisition could put me on a path to managing director within a year, and I will not have my bitter ex-wife hovering in the background trying to poison the room against me." I almost admired the scale of his delusion. "You think the chairman is coming here to discuss your promotion?" "I know he is interested in strong leadership," Derek said. "People at my level are the reason firms like Apex are worth acquiring." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And I know you. You cannot stand seeing me successful. You will find some way to create a scene unless I remove the incentive." He reached inside his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a slim leather checkbook. The gesture was so absurdly old-fashioned that for a moment I simply stared at it. Derek mistook my silence for interest. He took a pen from the inner pocket and began writing with quick, angry strokes. $5,000, he said. "That is more than enough to cover a hotel for a few nights, and whatever transportation you need. Take your fake family and leave through the side entrance. Do not come back to the ballroom. Do not contact Ashley. Do not talk to anyone from Apex. Just disappear for the rest of the night." He tore the check free and slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. I looked down at the amount. $5,000. Beneath it was Derek's signature, written with the same aggressive flourish I remembered from our divorce papers. I picked up the check carefully by one corner. "You are paying me to leave a wedding I was invited to," I said. "I am paying you to stop being a problem," Derek replied. "Call it whatever helps your pride." I reached for my phone as though I were checking a message and took a clear photograph of the check with his name, amount, and signature visible. The recording continued beneath my fingers. And what happens if I refuse? I asked. His expression changed instantly. The false generosity vanished. He leaned closer until the smell of bourbon on his breath reached me. Then I make sure you regret it, he said. I have relationships all over this city now. Banks, investors, landlords. I can make one call and make whatever tiny consulting business you have impossible to operate. I can tell people you are unstable. I can tell them you stalk me and show up at family events to harass my wife. By Monday, no serious firm in Chicago will want your name attached to anything. I kept my face perfectly calm. You would deliberately damage my business because I refused your $5,000 check. Do not make me repeat myself, Savannah. Take the money and go. The recording app captured every word. I slowly turned the check over between my fingers. 7 years earlier, he had emptied our joint account while I was in a hospital bed and left me without enough money to rent an apartment. Now he was sitting across from me, trying to use $5,000 as proof that he still controlled the price of my dignity. The symmetry was almost beautiful. You always did believe every problem had a number attached to it, I said. Derek gave me a thin, impatient smile. Most problems do. People pretend they have principles until the right amount appears in front of them. That explains a great deal about you. His smile disappeared. Do not get clever. I am giving you one chance to walk away quietly. I placed the check flat on the table and aligned it carefully with the edge of my plate. Then I pushed it back toward him. Keep it, I said. You are going to need every legitimate dollar you have very soon. For the first time, genuine fear flashed across his face. What is that supposed to mean? It means you should spend less time worrying about whether I belong at this wedding and more time wondering why your new company's leadership is interested in the internal records of regional acquisitions. Derek froze. His eyes narrowed. What records? I gave him the same calm smile I had worn in the lobby. I did not answer. He stared at me, trying to decide whether I knew something or was bluffing. I could practically see him reviewing his own secrets behind his eyes. Then he glanced toward the bar again. Nathaniel was walking back toward us, carrying a glass of water for Lily. That ended Derek's courage. He snatched the check from the table and shoved it into his pocket. This conversation never happened, he hissed as he stood. If you are smart, you will leave before the toast. I looked up at him. You might want to be more careful with sentences like that, Derek. They have a way of surviving longer than the people who say them expect. His face tightened. He turned and walked rapidly back toward the VIP section just as Nathaniel reached our table. Nathaniel set Lily's water down and looked after Derek's retreating figure. Productive conversation, he asked. Very, I said. I lifted the phone slightly so he could see the red recording indicator still glowing beneath the napkin. Nathaniel's eyes sharpened with immediate understanding. He did not ask me to explain in front of Lily. He simply resumed his seat and rested one hand lightly over mine. Across the ballroom. Derek threw back the rest of his bourbon in a single swallow. He believed he had just threatened me into silence. What he had actually done was hand me a signed check, a photograph, and a clean audio recording of attempted coercion. The night had officially moved beyond childish social humiliation. Derek had just created evidence with his own voice. The string quartet transitioned into a lively waltz. But the energy in our secluded corner remained perfectly insulated from the rest of the room. I looked at the audio recording app still running silently on my phone, which rested face down next to my dinner plate. Derek had just handed me a $5,000 bribe and threatened me in no uncertain terms, providing me with exactly the kind of leverage I needed. I carefully saved the audio file to a secure cloud server and slipped the phone back into my clutch. Nathaniel watched my methodical movements with a look of deep appreciation. He leaned back in his chair, observing the sprawling ballroom with the calm, calculating gaze of a chess grandmaster who had already seen 12 moves ahead. The beautiful, extravagant wedding reception was in full swing now. Professional waiters in crisp white jackets moved seamlessly between the round tables, pouring expensive wine and serving the first course. From our vantage point near the swinging kitchen doors, we had a comprehensive view of the entire event space. I looked toward the center of the room where the VIP tables were arranged. Derek was standing there holding a fresh glass of bourbon and actively trying to repair his damaged ego. I was aggressively cornering older, distinguished gentlemen, trying to force his way into their conversation. These powerful men were the true power players of Chicago. I recognized the chief executive of the largest commercial bank and a prominent real estate developer. Derek was laughing entirely too loud and clapping people on the shoulder, attempting to project the image of a seasoned executive. But his desperation practically rolled off him in waves. He kept glancing nervously toward the main entrance, clearly sweating over the impending arrival of the mysterious Vanguard chairman. He had no idea the man he was waiting for was sitting 50 feet away. The atmosphere in the room began to shift in a way that was entirely imperceptible to the average guest, but glaringly obvious to anyone who understood how true power operated in this city. The wealthy and influential possess a highly tuned radar for identifying the apex predator in any given room. They do not rely on flashy announcements or assigned seating charts. They recognize posture, presence, and quiet authority. I watched as the chief executive of the commercial bank, a man named Arthur, politely excused himself from Derek's aggressive networking attempts. Arthur turned around, sweeping his gaze across the ballroom as he adjusted his tailored suit jacket. His eyes skimmed over the crowded tables, the extravagant floral centerpieces, and the dance floor before finally landing on our poorly lit corner. I saw the exact moment recognition struck him. Arthur's posture instantly transformed. The polite, bored expression he had worn while listening to Derek vanished completely, replaced by a look of profound, absolute respect. He did not hesitate for a single second. He immediately abandoned the VIP section, stepping away from the crystal centerpieces and the eager social climbers. He began navigating through the maze of tables, making a direct, unwavering line straight toward the kitchen doors. Nathaniel did not look surprised as the prominent banker approached our table. He simply set down his fork and wiped his mouth with his linen napkin, projecting an aura of welcoming but guarded authority. Arthur stopped a respectful distance away, offering a deep, deferential bow of his head before he even spoke a word. "Nathaniel, it is an absolute honor to see you tonight," Arthur said, his voice thick with genuine reverence. "I had no idea you were in Chicago this weekend. If my office had known, we would have prepared a proper welcome for you." Nathaniel smiled, a measured, polite expression that gave nothing away. "It is a private family event," Nathaniel replied smoothly. "My wife and I are here to celebrate her cousin. We prefer to keep a low profile on these occasions." Arthur immediately turned his attention to me, his eyes wide with newfound respect. He recognized me not as the tragic ex-wife Derek had painted me to be, but as the woman who commanded the heart of the most powerful investor in the country. "Mrs. Vanguard, it is a profound pleasure to formally meet you," Arthur said, offering me the exact same deferential bow. "I have heard incredible things about your own consulting firm. The analytical work your team did on the recent downtown infrastructure project was nothing short of brilliant. My board was thoroughly impressed by your insights, and we are restructuring our internal risk protocol based exclusively on your firm's comprehensive reports." I smiled graciously, accepting the compliment with quiet confidence. "Thank you, Arthur," I replied, maintaining my composed demeanor. "We pride ourselves on accuracy. It is a pleasure to be recognized." Arthur was not the only one who had noticed Nathaniel's presence. The brief interaction had acted like a silent beacon to the other heavyweights in the room. The real estate developer noticed Arthur and followed his line of sight. Soon he was also making his way across the ballroom, leaving Derek standing awkwardly alone. Soon a small but incredibly influential crowd had gathered around our cramped table. A city councilman and two corporate chief executives abandoned their prime seating to stand in the shadows. They ignored the luxurious catering, choosing instead to stand in a cramped corner to acknowledge us. They formed a respectful semicircle around Nathaniel and me, waiting patiently for their turn to offer a polite greeting and shake Nathaniel's hand. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones, discussing market trends and global investments, while completely ignoring the wedding festivities happening around them. The sheer gravity of Nathaniel's influence had literally pulled the true power of the room into our little corner. I glanced across the ballroom to observe how my ex-husband was handling this massive shift in the social dynamic. Derek was standing by his empty VIP table, clutching his glass of bourbon so tightly his knuckles were turning white. His face was a contorted mask of confusion and deep-seated rage. He was watching the most important men in the city, the men he had spent the last hour desperately trying to impress, eagerly crowd around the table he had specifically assigned to me as a punishment. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly agitated that his newly acquired executive status was failing to command the level of absolute reverence he felt he deeply deserved. But because Derek's ego was so incredibly massive and his perception of reality was so fundamentally broken, he could not possibly put the pieces together. He could not comprehend that these billionaires and industry titans were paying their respects to Nathaniel. Instead, Derek's arrogant mind fabricated an entirely different delusional explanation. He genuinely believed that these elite guests were simply being overly polite and charitable. He assumed they noticed me sitting by the doors, recognized his abandoned ex-wife, and walked over to offer pity. In his completely twisted reality, these powerful men were just performing a very brief act of simple human charity for the pathetic woman before returning to do business with him. He honestly thought they were merely offering empty platitudes out of pity because I was completely isolated from the main celebration. Linda glared in our direction, her face pinched with familiar bitterness, clearly agreeing with whatever delusional theory Derek had just proposed. They both stood there fuming over the fact that I was receiving any attention at all, completely blind to the terrifying truth of the situation. Their arrogance was blinding them to the trap that was rapidly closing around them, and I relished every single second of their complete and utter ignorance tonight. They were sipping their expensive champagne and eagerly anticipating the grand arrival of the Vanguard chairman, absolutely convinced that their social triumph was entirely secure. They did not realize the executioner was already sitting in the room, patiently waiting to drop the heavy blade on their fragile paper empire. I reached down to my side where my sleek leather clutch rested against the chair. The smooth material felt cool beneath my fingertips as I unclasped the hidden magnetic closure. I slid my hand inside and retrieved a slim, lightweight tablet. I set it gently on the white tablecloth right next to my untouched dinner plate. Nathaniel glanced over, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet anticipation as the bright screen illuminated my face. He knew exactly what was on that device. I knew the immense destructive power contained within those highly encrypted files. I tapped the glass screen once, entering a complex alphanumeric passcode that granted me access to a deeply secured corporate cloud server. The interface loaded almost instantly, displaying the crisp geometric logo of my company. I allowed myself a brief moment to look across the crowded room at my ex-husband. Derek was adjusting his silk tie and checking his phone, clearly growing more anxious for the main event of the evening to begin. He was completely unaware that the main event was already unfolding right here at table 42. When Derek threw me out of my own home 7 years ago, he told me I was entirely useless. He loudly claimed I lacked the fundamental drive and basic ambition to ever succeed in the real world. He genuinely believed that stripping my bank account bare and leaving me completely isolated while I grieved the loss of our child would break my spirit forever. But he severely underestimated the profound, terrifying clarity that comes from hitting absolute rock bottom. I did not just survive his brutal betrayal. I channeled every single ounce of my profound grief and blistering rage into a singular, relentless focus. I refused to let his cruelty be the defining chapter of my life. Instead, I went back to school, earned my advanced master's degree in forensic accounting, and built my own empire entirely from the ground up. I founded Pinnacle Financial Consulting. Over the last 5 years, Pinnacle had steadily grown into the most ruthless and highly respected auditing firm in the entire Midwest. We did not handle standard yearly tax returns or basic corporate bookkeeping. We specialized strictly in high-stakes corporate forensics. When massive multinational conglomerates prepared for multi-million-dollar acquisitions or highly complex corporate mergers, they exclusively hired my team to dig through the shadows. We were the people who found the hidden debts, the cooked books, the shadow accounts, and the buried liabilities that desperate corporate executives tried so hard to conceal. My name had slowly become synonymous with absolute precision and unyielding integrity in the ruthless Chicago financial sector. Corporate board members genuinely feared a pinnacle audit because my team and I never missed a single discrepancy. And that unparalleled reputation was exactly how I had met Nathaniel. 2 years ago, Vanguard Holdings had hired my firm to thoroughly investigate a highly complex international merger that felt slightly wrong to him. Nathaniel and I had spent countless late nights in windowless boardrooms, poring over complicated financial statements and eventually identifying massive corporate fraud that saved his company millions. We fell in love over spreadsheets and encrypted data files, bonding over our shared relentless demand for absolute truth and transparency. He respected my brilliant mind and my fierce independence long before he ever asked me on a proper date. So when Vanguard Holdings decided they wanted to aggressively acquire Apex Investments earlier this year, Nathaniel naturally turned to my firm to conduct the forensic due diligence. He wanted a complete, comprehensive breakdown of the entire Apex corporate structure before he formally finalized the massive buyout. He wanted to know exactly what he was purchasing. He needed to analyze the profitability, the hidden market risks, and the overall competence of the executive team he was about to inherit. He essentially handed me the master keys to the entire Apex kingdom. For the past 8 weeks, my dedicated team of elite auditors and I had been quietly and methodically dissecting every single aspect of Derek's company. I had personally spent 2 months reading confidential internal emails, reviewing massive executive compensation packages, analyzing questionable expense reports, and tracking corporate bonuses down to the very last cent. I currently knew far more about the internal daily workings of Apex Investments than the senior partners who had worked there for 20 years. And I certainly knew vastly more about Derek's professional and personal financial reality than his own boastful wife did. While Brittany was busy picking out outdated sequined dresses for this wedding and aggressively bragging to anyone who would listen about her husband's massive career promotion, I was sitting in my corner office reading the exact details of his highly inflated salary. I tapped the screen of my tablet again, opening the final consolidated due diligence report that my team had prepared for the Vanguard Board of Directors. The document was hundreds of pages long, filled with charts, graphs, and detailed financial summaries. But I did not need to read the entire report. I knew exactly where to look. I navigated directly to the section detailing the human resources audit and executive risk assessment. I found Derek's name highlighted in bright yellow text. It was incredibly poetic that he had spent the entire evening looking down on me, assuming I was a pathetic, uneducated failure who needed to be shielded from high society. He truly believed he had outsmarted everyone and climbed his way to the absolute top of the corporate food chain. He honestly thought his new vice president title made him an untouchable god among men. But as I scrolled through his heavily documented file, the reality of his situation painted a completely different picture. I looked at Nathaniel, who was currently watching me with a look of absolute adoration and immense pride. He knew how hard I had worked on this specific audit. He knew how meticulously I had gathered the data, ensuring that every single claim was backed by undeniable, irrefutable mathematical proof. He had deliberately stayed entirely out of the investigation, allowing me to run the audit with complete autonomy. He trusted my judgment and my professional expertise implicitly. "This is almost too perfect," Nathaniel murmured, his deep voice barely carrying over the lively music playing across the ballroom. He leaned closer to me, resting his arm on the back of my chair. Seeing him stand over there completely oblivious to the fact that you hold his entire professional existence in the palm of your hand is incredibly satisfying, Savannah. I smiled, my eyes fixed firmly on the glowing screen of my tablet. "It is exactly what he deserves," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. "He built his entire fragile life on a foundation of lies and manipulation. He stepped on me to get ahead, and he has spent the last 7 years convincing himself that he is a superior human being. But numbers do not lie, Nathaniel. The math always tells the absolute truth." I tapped a specific folder labeled Internal Executive Expenditures and opened a highly secured subfile. This was the exact folder I had spent the last 3 days personally verifying. I needed to be absolutely certain that there were no errors, no misunderstandings, and no possible loopholes he could use to escape the consequences of his actions. I needed the trap to be completely inescapable. I glanced across the room one more time. Brittany was currently standing next to Derek, aggressively fanning herself and complaining to a passing waiter about the temperature in the ballroom. Derek was nodding along, trying to maintain his sophisticated facade while anxiously checking his phone again. They were both living in a beautiful, shimmering bubble of absolute delusion. They were practically salivating at the thought of shaking the new chairman's hand to fully secure their wealthy future. They had no idea that the chairman they were so desperately waiting to meet was sitting quietly in the darkest corner of the room, watching them fail. And they had absolutely no idea that the woman they had just spent 30 minutes publicly humiliating was the exact person who had just finalized the corporate audit that was about to completely destroy their lives. I lowered my gaze back to the glowing screen resting on the pristine white tablecloth. The encrypted file system was organized with surgical precision by my lead analysts. It was a magnificent piece of digital architecture designed to expose hidden truths. I tapped open the Master Financial Reconciliation folder. It contained everything. Every hidden bank statement, every fabricated vendor invoice, and every wire transfer that Derek thought he had cleverly concealed behind layers of complicated corporate shell companies. He had been so incredibly arrogant, assuming that the traditional accounting department at Apex Investments would never bother to look past the surface-level expense reports. And for a long time, he had been entirely correct. The previous leadership at Apex was famously complacent, prioritizing rapid growth over rigorous internal compliance. Derek had exploited that lazy culture to line his own pockets with absolute impunity. But my team at Pinnacle did not rely on basic surface-level checks. We utilized advanced proprietary software to cross-reference every single outgoing payment against registered business databases. I scrolled down the screen, bringing up a specific spreadsheet labeled Unauthorized Disbursements. The numbers staring back at me were staggering. Over the last 3 years, Derek had systematically embezzled $2.5 million directly from the Apex corporate accounts. He had set up fake consulting firms using addresses that linked back to empty commercial spaces. He would authorize massive monthly retainer fees for these imaginary consultants and then quietly funnel the money straight into his private offshore accounts. It was a classic rudimentary embezzlement scheme that only worked because no one had ever bothered to audit his specific regional department. I swiped to the next page of the report, pulling up the exact paper trail of where that stolen money had actually gone. This was the part that made the entire situation so poetically tragic. Derek had not stolen the money to make brilliant investments or secure his financial future. He had stolen the money exclusively to fund the fake, luxurious lifestyle that Brittany demanded every single day. I looked at the highly itemized list of his personal expenditures, which had been produced to my team under the authorized document access provisions of the acquisition due diligence process. There was the massive down payment for their sprawling 5-bedroom house in the exclusive suburb of Chicago. The mortgage was completely underwater, but the initial deposit had been paid using stolen corporate funds. I scrolled further down, spotting the lease agreements for his luxury sports car and Brittany's imported SUV. Both vehicles were paid for through a fake corporate vehicle allowance that Derek had illegally approved for himself. And then I found the final crowning piece of evidence. It was a digital receipt from a wholesale diamond importer located in the jewelry district. The receipt was for the exact ring Brittany had shoved in my face earlier tonight. The heavily flawed, poorly cut diamond had cost $85,000, and the payment had been wired directly from one of Derek's phantom consulting firms. The sheer level of delusion required to live that way was almost difficult to comprehend. Brittany had stood right in front of me, loudly calling me a gold digger and mocking my simple dress. She had proudly paraded around this elegant ballroom, bragging about her wealth and demanding respect from the other guests. She genuinely believed she had won the ultimate prize when Derek left me for her. But her entire glittering reality was built on a massive foundation of stolen money and federal crimes. The ring on her finger, the car she drove to this hotel, the roof over her head, none of it actually belonged to them. It all belonged to the company Nathaniel now owned. I felt Nathaniel shift his weight slightly in the chair beside me. He leaned in close enough that I could feel the gentle warmth of his breath against my shoulder. "Are we ready to conclude the investigation phase, Savannah?" he asked, his voice a low, steady rumble of unwavering support. I looked at the final page of the comprehensive executive summary. It clearly outlined the total amount of embezzled funds, the recommended legal actions, and the immediate termination protocols required for Derek and 3 of his complicit subordinates. The report was completely flawless. It was a watertight, legally binding death warrant for Derek's entire professional career. "I am completely ready," I replied, my voice entirely devoid of any hesitation or lingering doubt. I placed my index finger over the green button on the screen labeled Submit to Executive Board. But before I pressed down, I looked up and across the sprawling ballroom one last time. I needed to see him. I needed to look directly at the man who had thrown me out into the cold 7 years ago without a single ounce of human empathy. I needed to witness the exact final moment of his artificial supremacy before it all burned down. Derek was still standing near the center of the room, surrounded by the elegant floral displays and the soft glow of the candlelight. He was laughing loudly at something another guest had said, his head thrown back in manufactured amusement. He looked so incredibly pleased with himself, so utterly convinced of his own untouchable greatness in this high society setting. As if he could suddenly feel the heavy weight of my gaze from across the massive room, Derek abruptly stopped laughing. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the tables until they found mine. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the sudden visible shift in his posture. The confident smile slipped right off his face, replaced by a tight, nervous frown. He glared at me, trying to project intense intimidation, trying to silently command me to look away and submit to his authority like I used to do. He probably thought I was sitting there feeling miserable and jealous of his perfect life. He truly thought he had completely won. I did not break eye contact for a single second. I maintained a cold, steady gaze that pierced right through the loud classical music and the crowded dance floor. I allowed a small, sharp smile to touch the corners of my mouth. It was a smile of absolute finality and quiet promise. Derek's brow furrowed in deep, unhidden confusion. He took a hesitant half-step forward, clearly unsettled by my sudden display of total confidence. He opened his mouth to say something to Brittany, who was standing right next to him. He never got the chance to speak a single word. While keeping my eyes locked firmly onto his confused face, I pressed my finger down against the cool glass screen of my tablet. The bright green button flashed briefly. A small loading circle spun for a fraction of a second before a crisp notification popped up on the center of the screen. Document successfully transmitted to Vanguard Holdings Executive Board. The encrypted files were entirely gone. The forensic audit, the meticulous financial records, the undeniable proof of his massive embezzlement, and the formal recommendation for his termination were currently flying through the secure corporate servers directly to the phones of Nathaniel's legal and executive teams. There was absolutely no turning back now. The steel trap had not just been set, it had officially snapped shut violently around Derek's fragile neck. I took a deep, calming breath and locked my tablet, sliding it smoothly back into my leather clutch. I picked up my crystal champagne flute and raised it a few inches in the air, offering a silent mock toast directly to my ex-husband across the crowded room. Derek stared at me, his face pale and tight with an anxiety he could not understand yet. I knew something had just shifted in the atmosphere, but his arrogant mind was completely incapable of grasping the massive magnitude of the destruction hurtling toward him. He had spent 7 years believing he was the ultimate winner of our divorce, entirely convinced of his absolute superiority over me. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my drink, knowing that in a few short minutes, the music would stop, the illusions would shatter, and the real consequences would finally begin. The subtle chime of a crystal glass being tapped by a silver spoon gently cut through the ambient noise of the grand ballroom. It was a crisp, clear sound that immediately signaled a shift in the evening's carefully orchestrated schedule. The string quartet, which had been playing a lively arrangement for the past hour, gracefully faded their music out, drawing their bows back in perfect unison. The low murmur of hundreds of conversations slowly began to quiet down as guests turned their attention toward the elevated stage at the far end of the lavishly decorated room. I leaned back into my chair, feeling the solid, comforting presence of Nathaniel right beside me. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the heavy anticipation settle comfortably in my chest. The digital trap I had just activated was already doing its silent, devastating work in the background, and now the physical trap was about to be sprung right here in front of everyone. The man who stepped up to the microphone was Charles Montgomery, the outgoing chief executive officer of Apex Investments. He was an older, distinguished gentleman with silver hair and a tailored suit that spoke of decades spent navigating the lucrative corridors of the Chicago financial district. Charles had founded Apex 30 years ago, and he was widely respected by the wealthy elite gathered in the room tonight. He adjusted the microphone stand with a practiced ease, offering a warm, welcoming smile to the sea of expectant faces looking up at him. The heavy crystal chandeliers above us dimmed ever so slightly, casting a dramatic theatrical spotlight directly onto the stage. The entire ballroom fell into a respectful, absolute silence. Even the catering staff froze in place, holding their silver trays perfectly still to avoid making a single sound. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the beautiful union of Kevin and Ashley. Charles began, his voice booming clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. It is always a profound joy to see two young people begin their lives together, surrounded by such a wonderful community of family and friends. But tonight is a truly special evening for another very important reason. As many of you in the financial sector already know, this week marks a massive historic milestone for my company. Apex Investments has officially finalized our acquisition by Vanguard Holdings, marking the beginning of an incredible new chapter for our corporate family. From across the massive room, I could literally see the physical reaction rippling through Derek's entire body. He stood up straighter, throwing his shoulders back and puffing out his chest like a proud rooster. His face flushed with a dark, greedy shade of red. This was the exact moment he had been waiting for all evening long. This was the glorious public validation he craved more than oxygen. He genuinely believed that Charles was about to call him up to the stage, to publicly anoint him as the new golden boy of the merged companies. He thought this entire speech was a highly coordinated setup, specifically designed to highlight his brilliant recent promotion to vice president. I want to take a brief moment tonight to formally welcome the new leadership. Charles continued, his voice filled with genuine admiration. When I decided it was time to step down and sell the firm I built, I wanted to make absolutely certain that I was handing the reins over to someone with unparalleled vision. I wanted a leader who understands the complex modern market, someone with fierce integrity and a ruthless dedication to absolute excellence. Vanguard Holdings is a titan in the venture capital world, and the man who built it from the ground up is nothing short of a financial visionary. Derek could no longer contain his sheer, overwhelming excitement. He completely abandoned all basic social etiquette. He turned to Brittany, whispering something frantic and joyful in her ear before he started physically pushing his way through the dense crowd of standing guests. He did not care that he was aggressively bumping into elderly relatives or shoving past women in expensive silk gowns. His eyes were wide and completely fixed on the wooden steps leading up to the stage. He wanted to be positioned directly at the front of the room. He needed to be the very first person to shake the new chairman's hand, ensuring that every single important person in the entire hotel saw their incredibly close professional relationship. Brittany followed closely right behind him, riding the massive wave of his manufactured success. She held her head high, flashing her flawed diamond ring at anyone who accidentally made eye contact with her. Linda trailed after them, her velvet gown sweeping across the floor, her face glowing with intense maternal pride. They looked like a trio of conquering royalty marching toward their grand coronation. They aggressively elbowed their way right up to the very edge of the dance floor, stopping just 3 feet away from the stage stairs. Derek aggressively smoothed down the lapels of his tight-rented tuxedo jacket, running a nervous hand through his hair to make sure every single strand was perfectly in place. I watched him from my quiet, dark corner near the kitchen doors. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm, completely devoid of any anxiety. I saw Derek turn his head, scanning the back of the room, until his eyes found me sitting in the shadows. He locked eyes with me across the vast expanse of the ballroom and offered me the most vicious, triumphant smirk I had ever seen. It was a look that screamed absolute victory. He wanted to make absolutely certain that I was actively watching him ascend to the highest peak of high society. He wanted me to choke on my own supposed misery while he claimed his ultimate prize. I did not glare or look away. I simply offered him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, silently encouraging him to climb just a little bit higher on his fragile paper pedestal. We have spent the last few months working closely with the Vanguard executive team to ensure a smooth transition, Charles announced, gripping the sides of the wooden podium. And let me tell you, the future of this combined enterprise is incredibly bright. The man taking over has a reputation for completely transforming the industry. He does not tolerate mediocrity, he demands absolute transparency, and he rewards true hard work with unmatched loyalty. Hai is a man who built an empire entirely on his own merit, and I am deeply honored that he chose to attend our celebration tonight. Derek actually took a half step toward the stairs, anticipating the cue. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy, shifting his weight from one polished shoe to the other. He reached up and adjusted his silk tie again, licking his lips as he prepared his best corporate smile. He had likely spent the last 2 weeks practicing exactly what he was going to say in this very moment. He probably had a slick, charming opening line ready to go, carefully designed to show the crowd that he and the billionaire chairman were already close personal friends. He was entirely consumed by his own monumental delusion, completely blind to the fact that he was standing on a trapdoor that was fully rigged to drop. I felt Nathaniel shift beside me, preparing himself for what was about to happen next. He reached over and gently took my hand, intertwining his warm, strong fingers with mine. His touch was incredibly grounding, an anchor of absolute stability, in a room that was about to descend into complete chaos. He looked at me, his dark eyes shining with profound affection and deep respect. He was not doing this to show off his wealth or to feed his own ego. He was doing this entirely for me. I was stepping into the blinding spotlight specifically to burn down the man who had tried to destroy me. We have kept his attendance tonight, a very closely guarded secret. Charles explained, his eyes scanning the crowd with a warm, knowing smile. He prefers to let his tremendous work speak for itself, rather than seeking the spotlight. But tonight is a very different story, Charles added, his voice rising with genuine theatrical excitement. I want all of you to look around this beautiful room and join me in welcoming a true visionary leader. Please raise your glasses high and give the absolute warmest welcome to our brand new chairman tonight. Charles Montgomery, the outgoing Chief Executive Officer of Apex Investments, leaned forward into the silver microphone. His voice boomed clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing off the high ceilings and the massive crystal chandeliers. Please join me in giving the absolute warmest welcome to the new chairman of Vanguard Holdings, Nathaniel, and his truly brilliant wife, Savannah. The words hung heavily in the air, vibrating across the incredibly vast ballroom. For a fraction of a second, the entire venue remained perfectly still as hundreds of guests processed the introduction. Down on the polished dance floor, Derek stood completely frozen. His eager, arrogant smile instantly decayed into a horrific mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood drained so rapidly from his face that he looked violently ill. Brittany dropped her expensive champagne flute, letting it shatter loudly against the hardwood floor. Her jaw fell open, her eyes darting frantically toward the stage, as if she was desperately hoping that another couple named Nathaniel and Savannah would magically materialize from behind the heavy velvet curtains. Linda let out a short, choked gasp. Her hand flew to her thick pearl necklace, clutching it tightly, as her knees visibly buckled beneath her heavy velvet gown. Nathaniel calmly stood up from our cramped, poorly lit table near the swinging kitchen doors. He reached down, offering me his hand, with a warm, incredibly reassuring smile. I placed my hand in his, rising to my feet with slow, deliberate grace. The movement caught the attention of the surrounding guests, and suddenly the entire ballroom turned to watch us. A collective gasp rippled through the high society crowd as people realized that the billionaire chairman and his wife had been deliberately seated in the absolute worst spot in the venue. We began our walk toward the front of the room, our footsteps steady and perfectly synchronized. The sea of wealthy guests parted for us immediately, creating a wide, clear path. We walked directly past the VIP section, where my former family stood paralyzed in their own manufactured nightmare. As we approached them, Derek suddenly snapped out of his stunned trance. Blind panic and utter desperation overrode his basic common sense. He lunged forward, stepping directly into our path, his arms raised as if he could physically stop reality from happening to him. "No, this is a massive mistake," Derek stammered loudly, his voice cracking with wild hysteria. "This is a sick joke. She is my ex-wife. She has absolutely nothing." Before Nathaniel could even react, two large security guards in dark suits materialized from the shadows. They effortlessly grabbed Derek by his shoulders, lifting him slightly off his feet, and shoved him forcefully back into the crowded audience. We did not slow our pace or even glance in his direction. We walked up the wooden stairs and stepped onto the brightly lit stage. Charles Montgomery beamed, stepping forward to shake Nathaniel's hand with profound respect, then offering me a polite welcoming bow. Nathaniel turned to face the vast ballroom, his commanding presence instantly demanding absolute silence. He looked out over the sea of faces, his dark eyes eventually finding Derek, who was currently being restrained by the two security guards at the edge of the dance floor. "Thank you for the incredibly warm welcome, Charles," Nathaniel said, his deep voice resonating through the large speakers. "I am incredibly proud of this acquisition, and I expect truly great things from the future of this combined company. But I did not build my empire by standing alone in the dark. My success is deeply intertwined with the brilliant, powerful woman standing right beside me. Therefore, I believe it is only fitting that my wife addresses you tonight." He stepped back and gently handed me the microphone. I wrapped my fingers around the cool metal of the microphone. I looked out over the hundreds of powerful guests, taking a slow, steady breath. I felt absolutely no fear, no anxiety, and no hesitation whatsoever. The scared, broken girl who had wept on a hospital bed 7 years ago was entirely gone. I found Derek in the crowd. He was staring up at me, his eyes wide with the terrifying realization that his entire fabricated world was actively collapsing around him. Brittany was standing slightly behind him, openly weeping from the sheer humiliation of the moment, realizing she was wearing a cheap, outdated dress and a flawed diamond in front of the very people she had desperately wanted to impress. Linda looked like she was going to faint, leaning heavily against a decorative floral pillar for physical support. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell or scream or show a single ounce of uncontrolled anger. I spoke with a perfectly measured, lethally calm tone that carried effortlessly to every single corner of the massive room. "Earlier this evening, a man in this room approached me in the lobby. I began, my voice crystal clear and unwavering. He is someone I used to know a very long time ago. He went out of his way to approach me and tell me that leaving me was the smartest decision he ever made in his entire life." A low, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the high society crowd. People exchanged shocked glances, completely captivated by the raw, unvarnished truth unfolding before them. He wanted me to feel small. I continued, keeping my eyes firmly locked on Derek's sweating face. He wanted me to feel broken, isolated, and entirely worthless. He firmly believed that by abandoning me during the darkest, most painful moment of my life, he had secured his own ultimate victory. He genuinely thought he had destroyed my future and guaranteed his own everlasting success. But standing here tonight, looking at what my life has become, I have to admit something to him and to all of you. For the very first time in my life, I completely agree with his assessment. Derek flinched violently, as if I had physically struck him across the face with a heavy stone. His departure was undeniably the smartest thing he ever did, because his absence finally created the necessary room for my true success. I declared, my voice gaining strength and quiet, undeniable power. When you strip everything away from a person, you leave them with absolutely nothing to lose and everything in the world to build. 7 years ago, I was left with nothing but an empty house and a shattered heart. But I adamantly refused to let his cruelty be the defining chapter of my story. Instead, I channeled my profound grief into relentless ambition. I went back to school. I earned my advanced degrees in forensic accounting, and I poured every single ounce of my energy into building a beautiful reality that no one could ever take away from me again. I paused, letting the profound weight of my words sink into the silent, captivated room. I did not just survive, I stated, shifting my gaze across the audience to ensure everyone understood the magnitude of my personal achievements. I did not just find a new husband to take care of me. I founded Pinnacle Financial Consulting. Over the last 5 years, my dedicated team and I have built the most rigorous, highly respected corporate auditing firm in the entire Midwest. We specialize in holding greedy executives accountable, uncovering hidden corporate liabilities, and ensuring absolute transparency in high-stakes mergers. And my firm was the independent entity specifically hired by Vanguard Holdings to conduct the comprehensive forensic due diligence on Apex Investments prior to finalizing this acquisition. The collective gasp from the Apex executives in the room was clearly audible over the sound system. They instantly understood exactly what that meant. They knew the terrifying, relentless reputation of Pinnacle Financial Consulting. I looked back down at Derek, whose face had gone from a sickly gray to a chalky white. He looked as though he had stopped breathing altogether. He was clutching his chest, his expensive rented tuxedo jacket wrinkling under his desperate grip. The realization of what I had just said was finally penetrating his thick, arrogant skull. I was not just the wife of the new chairman. I was the exact person who had spent the last 8 weeks meticulously dissecting his entire professional existence. I systematically dismantled the grand illusion Derek had spent years building. For 7 years, you paraded around this city pretending you were a genius, I said, leaning closer. You convinced your new wife that your title made you superior. But the truth is always hidden perfectly within the numbers, Derek. You did not earn your lifestyle through hard work or investments. You built your fragile life on a massive foundation of deceit and corporate theft. You thought you could hide your fraudulent expense reports and offshore bank accounts, but you never expected that the exact woman you threw away would be the one exposing you to all of Chicago high society tonight. I let that final sentence settle for one long second, then turned slightly toward the side of the stage. The audiovisual team had been waiting for the signal Nathaniel and I agreed upon earlier. I raised 2 fingers. The technician near the control station immediately nodded. Behind me, the enormous ballroom screens that had been displaying a tasteful wedding monogram faded to black. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Brittany looked toward the screens and then back at me. Derek stopped struggling against the security guards. For the first time all evening, his attention was no longer on the people watching him. It was fixed on the glowing rectangles behind my shoulders. The first slide appeared. Pinnacle Financial Consulting. Apex Investments Forensic Due Diligence. Executive Risk Summary. The room went completely silent. I did not display confidential client information unrelated to Derek. The presentation had been prepared specifically for this disclosure and contained only the findings already authorized for the Vanguard executive team and legal counsel. Every line on the screen was tied to the investigation now driving his termination. No gossip, no speculation, just dates, amounts, account paths, and supporting documents. You accused me tonight of being a fraud, I said into the microphone, so I thought it was appropriate to let the numbers answer for me. The slide changed. A 3-year transaction timeline filled the screen. Red markers appeared month after month beside payments routed from Apex regional accounts to consulting vendors that had no employees, no operating history, and no legitimate services attached to them. The total at the bottom was impossible to ignore. $2,500,000 in unauthorized disbursements. Several Apex executives stood abruptly from their tables. I saw one man remove his glasses and stare at the screen as if cleaning the lenses might change the number. Charles Montgomery remained beside the podium with his face set in hard, professional disappointment. Derek shook his head violently. "That is not real," he shouted. "Those are legitimate vendors. She is manipulating the data." I tapped the small remote in my hand. The next screen displayed corporate registration records beside the vendor invoices. The addresses matched empty commercial suites. The authorized signatures were Derek's. A series of arrows traced the payments from Apex through the phantom consulting firms and into accounts connected to him. Every vendor shown here was examined independently, I said. No employees, no verified service delivery, no legitimate contracts supporting the monthly retainers, but every payment was approved through Derek's regional authority. The murmurs grew louder. Another slide appeared, showing selected fraudulent expense reports. Luxury vehicle leases had been categorized as regional transportation assets. Personal travel had been labeled client development. Household expenditures had been routed through corporate reimbursement codes. Each entry included a date amount and approval path. Brittany stared at the screens with her mouth open. Her earlier confidence had vanished. She looked at Derek, then down at her own jewelry, as if she were suddenly afraid of everything she was wearing. I pressed the remote again. A photograph of the wholesale diamond invoice filled the center screen. Beneath it was the payment trail. $85,000 had moved from an Apex account to one of Derek's phantom consulting companies, and from there to the jeweler. I looked directly at Brittany. "You spent this evening waving that ring in my face as proof that you won," I said. "You called me a gold digger because I did not dress loudly enough for you. The ring you used to measure your superiority was purchased with money stolen from the company standing behind this acquisition." Brittany's left hand dropped as if the diamond had suddenly become hot enough to burn her skin. She stared at Derek in horror. "You told me you paid for this from your bonus," she said. Derek did not answer. The next slide displayed a simplified asset summary. The down payment on their suburban house, the luxury car payments, the imported sport utility vehicle. Transfers from the same cluster of fraudulent accounts appeared beside each item. The visual was devastating because no explanation was necessary. Their entire public image had been financed by the same theft. Then the screen shifted to liabilities Derek had never disclosed properly during internal reviews. Personal credit lines were buried behind business reimbursements. Past due obligations had been moved between accounts to keep them from appearing together on any single report. The house that Brittany treated like proof of permanent wealth was carrying more debt than equity, and several payments depended on cash diverted through the same fraudulent vendor network. The numbers did not merely show theft. They showed that the glamorous life Derek had sold to everyone in the room was financially collapsing, even before my team exposed where the money came from. "This is a lie!" Derek yelled again, but the desperation in his voice had stripped the words of any authority. "Savannah hates me. She built this because she is obsessed with our divorce." I faced him fully. If I wanted revenge, I would not need hundreds of pages of reconciled financial evidence, I said. I would need anger. What you are looking at is not anger. It is an audit. The screen changed once more. This time it showed the forensic reconciliation summary with confirmation boxes beside the supporting categories. Vendor verification, bank routing, expense documentation, internal approval records, asset tracing. The clean clinical structure made his frantic denial look almost childish. I heard someone near the front whisper $2.5 million. Another executive asked Charles whether the board had already received the full report. Charles gave a single grim nod. Derek saw it. That nod broke something in him. He stopped yelling and simply stared at the screens. His shoulders sagged. The truth was no longer trapped inside my tablet where he could pretend I had invented it. It was 20 feet high above the ballroom in front of colleagues, investors, family members, and every person he had tried to impress tonight. I advanced to the final slide. Recommended actions: immediate termination, preservation of records, asset recovery, referral to legal authorities. A sharp gasp moved through the room. I lowered the remote but kept the microphone raised. "For 8 weeks my team reviewed the financial reality of Apex Investments," I said. "We did not know this wedding would become the place where Derek chose to publicly attack me. We did not create these transactions tonight. We did not fabricate 3 years of transfers because he insulted my dress. The evidence existed before he walked into this hotel. The only thing Derek changed tonight was the number of witnesses who saw exactly who he is when he thinks another person has less power than he does." The screens remained on the final recommendation. Derek looked from the word termination to Nathaniel and then back to me. His face had become colorless. Brittany took one slow step away from him. Linda whispered his name, but he did not react. I looked across the ballroom at the same people Derek had spent the evening courting. Bank executives, developers, corporate leaders, and members of his own firm were no longer viewing him as an ambitious vice president. They were looking at a documented risk. In the financial world, reputation could disappear faster than money, and his was collapsing in real time. I turned my gaze back to Derek. "You told me in the lobby that leaving me was the smartest decision you ever made," I said. "I agreed with you. But stealing from your company was not smart. Forging the paper trail was not smart. Financing a lifestyle you could not afford was not smart. And threatening the auditor who already had the evidence was certainly not smart. His eyes widened at the last sentence. He understood that I had not forgotten the $5,000 check or the recording. I did not play the audio for the room. I did not need to. The financial evidence was already overwhelming, and the recording was preserved for the people who would evaluate it properly. I wanted this moment to remain anchored in facts, rather than spectacle. I gave the AV team one final nod. The screens faded from the audit summary back to black, leaving the words of the findings hanging in everyone's mind, even after they disappeared. There was no applause. There did not need to be. The silence was far more powerful. Derek stood restrained at the edge of the dance floor, surrounded by the wreckage of the identity he had built. Brittany stared at him as if he were a stranger. Linda looked physically ill. Charles had stopped looking disappointed and now looked furious. The evidence had been shown. The argument was over. All that remained were consequences. The silence in the grand ballroom was so profound that I could clearly hear the panicked, ragged breathing of my ex-husband from 50 feet away. I lowered the silver microphone, letting my words settle heavily over the beautifully decorated tables and the hundreds of elite guests. The two large security guards maintained their firm grip on Derek's shoulders, preventing him from moving. His face was a mask of absolute horror. He looked wildly around the massive room, desperately searching for a friendly face. But the powerful men he had spent the evening trying to impress were all staring at him with unhidden disgust. Charles Montgomery, the outgoing chief executive officer of Apex Investments, stood a few feet away from me on the stage, shaking his head in profound disappointment. Derek had been completely exposed, and in the ruthless high-stakes world of Chicago finance, a confirmed thief was instantly radioactive. I turned my head and looked at Nathaniel. He stepped forward, his bespoke tuxedo catching the stage lights, and gently took the microphone from my hand. His fingers brushed against mine, offering a silent, powerful reassurance. Nathaniel did not immediately speak. He allowed the heavy silence to stretch out, building the tension until it felt almost suffocating. He looked out over the sea of wealthy guests, projecting an aura of quiet, absolute command. When you acquire a company with the extensive history and market presence of Apex Investments, you expect to find certain operational inefficiencies. Nathaniel began, his deep voice rolling across the vast ballroom. You expect to find redundant departments, outdated software systems, and perhaps a few executives who are resistant to necessary change. You prepare your transition team to handle those standard corporate hurdles. What you do not expect to find is a senior-level vice president who has spent the last 3 years treating his regional department like his own personal slush fund. A man who forged vendor invoices, created phantom consulting firms, and systematically drained $2.5 million from the corporate accounts to fund a pathetic illusion of personal wealth. Nathaniel shifted his piercing gaze directly down to where Derek was standing. Derek visibly flinched under the heavy weight of that stare, trying to shrink back into the crowd, but the security guards held him firmly in place on the edge of the dance floor. You spent this entire evening parading around this hotel, bragging about your recent promotion. Nathaniel continued, his tone laced with icy surgical precision. You proudly told my wife and anyone else who would listen that you were an aggressive, brilliant leader who was essential to the future of this combined enterprise. But the comprehensive audit conducted by Pinnacle Financial Consulting proves that you are nothing more than a common thief dressed in a rented tuxedo. You lack the basic intelligence to properly cover your tracks, and you lack the fundamental integrity required to operate within my organization. Vanguard Holdings operates on a foundation of absolute transparency and relentless accountability. We do not tolerate corporate parasites. Derek opened his mouth, his chest heaving as he desperately tried to form a coherent defense. Sir, please, he choked out, his voice cracking with wild panic. You have to let me explain. The audit is wrong. Savannah is just trying to frame me because she is bitter about our divorce. I am a top performer. I bring in millions in revenue for this company. You cannot do this to me based on her lies. Nathaniel did not even blink at the pathetic display of desperation. Your performance metrics are entirely fabricated, Derek Nathaniel stated coldly. And my wife does not lie. The encrypted files transmitted to my executive board 15 minutes ago contain undeniable, irrefutable proof of your massive embezzlement. Therefore, effective immediately, your employment with Apex Investments and Vanguard Holdings is permanently terminated. You are officially fired. The words struck Derek with the devastating force of a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly, forcing the security guards to bear the majority of his body weight to keep him standing upright. He let out a strange, strangled gasp, shaking his head in rapid, frantic denial. But Nathaniel was not finished. The public termination was merely the very first step in dismantling the fraudulent life Derek had built upon my suffering. If losing your undeserved corporate title was the only consequence you faced tonight, you would be an incredibly lucky man. Nathaniel continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. But Vanguard Holdings does not simply fire individuals who steal millions of dollars from our corporate accounts. We prosecute them to the absolute fullest extent of the federal law. When my wife initiated the final document transfer to my executive team, it automatically triggered a series of pre-planned legal protocols. Our corporate attorneys have already contacted the appropriate law enforcement authorities. They are currently in possession of the complete forensic audit, including the exact routing numbers for your offshore accounts, the fraudulent lease agreements for your luxury vehicles, and the digital receipts for the jewelry you purchased with stolen funds. Derek let out a loud, wretched sob of pure terror. The arrogant, smug man who had mocked my simple dress in the lobby was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified criminal staring down the barrel of a potential federal prison sentence. Please, Derek begged, tears actively streaming down his pale face. Please do not do this. I will pay it all back. I swear I will return every single cent. Just let me walk away quietly. I will sign whatever you want. Nathaniel shook his head, a look of absolute disgust crossing his handsome features. It is far too late for quiet negotiations, Derek. You made your choices when you decided to build your life on stolen money, and you sealed your own fate when you decided to disrespect my family tonight. You cannot pay the money back because as of 10 minutes ago, our legal team has already secured emergency preservation measures and notified the relevant financial institutions. Accounts and assets tied to the suspected proceeds are being restricted pending the investigation. You should assume those funds are no longer available to you. The vehicles purchased or leased through the fraudulent accounts are already being flagged for recovery. The sheer magnitude of his total financial ruin washed over the silent ballroom. The wealthy elite of Chicago watched in absolute fascination as a man who had spent the entire evening desperately trying to climb the social ladder was violently shoved off the highest rung. Derek began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving frantically as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. He looked down at his own trembling hands, as if he could physically see the imaginary wealth slipping right through his fingers. Every single thing he valued, every material possession he used to validate his hollow existence was gone in the blink of an eye. He had traded his basic human decency and his marriage for a glittering illusion that had just evaporated into thin air. The large security guards immediately tightened their heavy grips on his shaking arms, preparing to physically escort him out of the building the exact moment they received the signal. He was no longer a powerful, highly respected vice president hosting a lavish wedding reception. He was nothing more than a pathetic, penniless criminal desperately waiting to be handed over directly to the federal authorities tonight. The heavy silence that had blanketed the ballroom was suddenly shattered by a sharp, piercing sound. It was the sound of Brittany taking a sudden, ragged breath as the absolute reality of Nathaniel's words finally penetrated her thick wall of delusion. She had spent the last few minutes standing perfectly still, processing the terrifying fact that the man she had proudly flaunted to this entire room was not a wealthy executive, but a desperate criminal. The shimmering illusion of her perfect high society life was dissolving into ash right before her eyes. She looked at Derek, who was still being held firmly by the security guards, his face slick with cold sweat and his eyes wide with absolute panic. For a moment I wondered if Brittany might actually surprise me. I wondered if she might step forward and stand by her husband in his darkest hour the way a true partner should. But my brief curiosity was instantly rewarded with exactly the kind of toxic behavior I had always known she possessed. Brittany did not step forward to comfort Derek. Instead, she took a massive step backward, putting as much physical distance between herself and him as she possibly could. Her face twisted into a hideous mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You lied to me!" Brittany shrieked, her shrill voice slicing through the quiet room and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You completely lied to me, Derek." Derek flinched at the sheer volume of her voice, turning his panicked gaze toward her. "Brittany, please," he begged, his voice cracking pathetically. "Please just let me explain. I did it all for us. I did it to give you the life you wanted." Brittany let out a harsh, bitter bark of laughter that sounded entirely unhinged. "To give me the life I wanted," she yelled, taking another step backward. "You are a broke, pathetic felon. You dragged me into this high-class event tonight, making me brag to everyone about your massive promotion and your huge salary. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of all these important people. You told me you were rich, Derek. You told me you had millions of dollars. I do not have anything anymore, Brittany," Derek sobbed, the reality of his frozen bank accounts completely crushing his fragile spirit. "But we can start over. We can figure this out together." "Start over!" Brittany screamed, her face turning a bright blotchy red with profound fury. "Are you actually out of your mind right now? You are going to a federal prison, Derek. You stole millions of dollars from a billionaire, and you bought my house with embezzled money. The government is going to take my house. They are going to take my car. I am going to be left with absolutely nothing because of your stupid, greedy lies." The united front they had so aggressively presented in the lobby less than an hour ago had completely and utterly imploded. The profound love and devotion they had constantly shoved in my face was instantly revealed to be nothing more than a fragile transactional arrangement built entirely on stolen corporate funds. The very second the money evaporated, Brittany's manufactured loyalty evaporated right along with it. Derek tried to reach a shaking hand out toward her, despite the security guards holding his arms. "Brittany, please do not do this to me," he pleaded, his face crumpled in sheer desperation. "You are my wife. You promised to stand by me. I promised to stand by a successful corporate executive." Brittany spat back at him, her eyes blazing with toxic rage. "I did not agree to marry a pathetic broke criminal who buys discount diamonds with stolen company money to try and look important." With a sudden violent motion, Brittany reached her right hand over to her left hand. She aggressively grabbed the massive flawed diamond ring that she had spent the entire evening aggressively shoving into my face. She yanked it off her finger with such force that it left a bright red mark on her skin. She did not hesitate for a single second. She threw the heavy ring directly at Derek's chest. The metal band hit his rented tuxedo jacket with a dull thud before bouncing off and clattering loudly onto the polished hardwood dance floor. The sound of the fake symbol of their marriage hitting the ground was incredibly poetic. "You are a complete fraud!" Derek Brittany yelled, pointing a shaking acrylic nail at his face. "And I want absolutely nothing to do with you or your miserable, pathetic life ever again. Do not ever try to contact me." Without another word, Brittany spun around on her high heels. She pushed her way through the crowd of stunned, silent guests, practically sprinting toward the grand exit doors of the ballroom. She left him standing there, completely humiliated, stripped of his wealth, his career, his reputation, and finally his highly transactional wife. Derek watched her disappear into the lobby, his chest heaving with deep, wrenching sobs of absolute defeat. The sheer brutality of their public breakup was staggering to witness, but the chaos in the room was far from over. As Derek slumped defeated between the two security guards, a sudden frantic movement caught my attention. Linda, who had been leaning heavily against a decorative floral pillar for physical support, suddenly pushed herself upright. Her face was streaked with running mascara, and her elaborate updo had completely unraveled, leaving loose strands of graying hair hanging around her pale face. She had just watched her precious golden boy lose his job, his fortune, and his wife in the span of 5 devastating minutes. The elitist world she had worshipped her entire life had completely rejected her son, leaving him entirely destitute. Panic and profound desperation completely overrode her usual haughty demeanor. She stumbled forward, her heavy velvet gown dragging awkwardly across the floor as she rushed directly toward the elevated stage where Nathaniel and I were standing. "Savannah!" Linda cried out, her voice cracking with hysterical, frantic sobs. "Savannah, please wait. You have to stop this." She reached the bottom of the wooden stairs, gripping the handrail tightly as she looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. The woman who had spent the last 7 years mocking my pain and aggressively belittling my existence was now standing at my feet, looking up at me like I was her only savior in the entire world. The absolute hypocrisy of the moment was breathtaking. "Please, Savannah, you have to tell him to call off the police," Linda begged, tears actively streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "You cannot let them send my son to a federal prison. He will not survive it. He is a good boy, Savannah. He just made a terrible mistake. You have the power to stop this right now. Please tell your husband to let this go." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the hysterical woman grasping the stair rail. I did not step back or show any sign of intimidation. Nathaniel stood right beside me, a silent mountain of unwavering support, simply observing how I chose to handle this pathetic display of manipulation. "A mistake, Linda?" I asked, my voice projecting a cold, steady calm over her loud, frantic sobbing. "Forgetting to pay a utility bill is a mistake. Systematically embezzling $2.5 million over the course of 3 years to fund a fake luxurious lifestyle is a highly calculated federal crime. He knew exactly what he was doing every single time he authorized a fraudulent transfer." "But he is family, Savannah." Linda pleaded, her voice growing even more shrill and desperate as she tried to play the one card she thought might actually work. "We are still family. You were my daughter-in-law. You were part of our lives for years. You cannot just stand up there and completely destroy us like this. Have some mercy. We loved you, Savannah. We always considered you a part of our home." The sheer audacity of her words was genuinely astounding. She was desperately trying to rewrite a decade of emotional abuse and toxic cruelty in a pathetic attempt to save her son from the consequences of his own criminal actions. She wanted me to magically forget the countless times she had humiliated me, the cruel comments about my career, and the devastating moment she had helped throw me out of my own house when I was bleeding and broken. I felt a deep, powerful sense of closure wash over my entire being. I had spent years wondering if they ever felt a single ounce of remorse for what they did to me. Looking down at Linda right now, I finally had my absolute answer. They were not sorry for hurting me. They were only sorry that I had gained the power to hold them accountable, and I had absolutely no intention of offering them a single drop of the mercy they had violently denied me when I needed it most. Linda was staring up at me, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the bright stage lights. She was waiting for me to break to show that soft, submissive nature she had always exploited. But she found a wall of solid ice. Mercy is a rare privilege reserved for those who show genuine remorse. "Linda," I said, my voice dropping to a register so incredibly calm it made her physically recoil. "You are not crying because you feel bad about what you did to me. You are crying because the massive checkbook that funded your arrogant lifestyle just snapped shut forever." Linda shook her head violently, gripping the wooden handrail so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That is simply not true, Savannah. I am a mother. I was just trying to protect my son. You have to understand a mother's love." I took a deliberate step forward, looking directly down into her panicked eyes. My expression was detached, completely devoid of any lingering anger. "I do understand a mother's love," I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy air. "I understood it perfectly 7 years ago when I was lying in a hospital bed mourning the absolute loss of my own baby. Do you clearly remember what you told me the morning you helped Derek change the locks on my house?" Linda swallowed very hard, unable to form a coherent word. Her eyes darted frantically toward Nathaniel as if hoping he would intervene, but he simply stood beside me, a silent guardian watching justice take its natural course. "I remember your exact words, Linda." I continued, refusing to let her look away. I was standing on the porch, physically shaking from the blood loss and the profound grief. "You looked me right in the eyes and you told me that I was a defective burden." You told me that Derek deserved a real woman who could actually give him a legacy. And when I asked you how you could be so cruel to your own family, you laughed. You told me that family was exclusively for winners, and that I was nothing but a pathetic loser who needed to be left behind. The elite guests standing near the stage gasped quietly at the sheer brutality of the public revelation. They were wealthy people who understood cutthroat business tactics. But the absolute cruelty of kicking a grieving mother out onto the cold street crossed a profound moral line. Linda began to openly weep, her chest heaving with heavy dramatic sobs. Savannah, please, I was wrong. I will get on my knees right now and apologize to you in front of everyone. Just please do not let them send my boy to a federal prison. He is all I have left. You are absolutely right about one thing, Linda, I said, keeping my posture perfectly straight. You told me that family was for winners. Well, you were right. I won. The words struck her with the devastating force of a physical blow. She let out a loud, wretched sob, burying her face in her trembling hands. The elaborate pearls around her neck shook violently with each ragged breath she took. I am not doing this to you out of some petty desire for revenge, I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried to the security guards holding Derek. Revenge is an emotional reaction driven by lingering hurt. I do not hurt for you anymore. What is happening tonight is not revenge. It is absolute mathematical justice. Derek broke the federal law. He stole millions of dollars from honest, hardworking people to buy cheap diamonds and leased sports cars. He forged corporate documents and lied to his executive board. He is facing the exact natural consequences of his own calculated criminal behavior. I looked past Linda to where Derek was standing. The two large security guards were holding him firmly in place on the edge of the polished hardwood dance floor. He looked entirely defeated. The arrogant, confident executive who had mocked my simple dress in the grand lobby was completely gone. He was just a hollow, empty shell of a man waiting for the authorities to arrive and take him away. You wanted to play high-stakes corporate games, Derek. I called out to him, my voice echoing slightly across the massive room. You wanted to sit at the table with billionaires and industry titans. But you forgot the most fundamental rule of business. You always have to pay your debts, and tonight your massive debt has finally come entirely due. Derek did not respond. He simply let his head fall forward, his chin resting against his chest, as silent tears streamed down his pale cheeks. He had absolutely nothing left to say. There were no more lies to spin, no more fake titles to hide behind, and no more stolen money to buy his way out of trouble. I turned my attention back to the elevated stage. Charles Montgomery, the outgoing chief executive officer of Apex Investments, was standing near the grand piano used by the string quartet. He had his mobile phone pressed tightly against his ear. His face was a mask of furious professional urgency as he spoke rapidly to the person on the other end of the line. I was frantically calling the local police department requesting their immediate presence to apprehend a senior executive for corporate embezzlement. The beautiful fairy tale wedding reception had completely transformed into an active crime scene. The elegant floral arrangements and the soft romantic candlelight now served as a highly ironic backdrop for the total destruction of the bride's side of the family. I looked down at Linda one final time. She was still weeping softly at the bottom of the wooden stairs, her heavy velvet gown pooling awkwardly around her on the floor. She looked incredibly small and pathetic. All of her arrogant, boasting, and aggressive social climbing had ultimately brought her absolutely nothing but profound public humiliation and total financial devastation. The heavy, toxic weight I had carried around my neck for the past 7 years was finally gone. I was completely free. I had successfully reclaimed my life, my business, and my fundamental human dignity without compromising a single one of my core personal values. Do not ever try to contact me again, Linda. I said, my voice gentle but laced with an undeniable finality. Do not try to call my office. Do not try to send messages through mutual acquaintances. You and your son are officially erased from my reality. I highly suggest you spend your remaining energy figuring out how to pay for a very good criminal defense attorney, because Vanguard Holdings will not rest until Derek faces the absolute maximum sentence allowed by federal law. I turned my back on her, breaking the visual connection completely. I did not care to watch her cry anymore. I did not care to watch Derek get handcuffed and dragged out of the grand ballroom by the police. I had delivered the absolute truth, exposed the massive fraud, and secured my total justice. My work here was entirely finished. The chapter of my life, containing Derek and his toxic family, was now officially closed forever, leaving me perfectly positioned to embrace the beautiful future I had built. Nathaniel was waiting patiently for me right at the edge of the stage stairs. His dark eyes were filled with an overwhelming amount of pride and profound unconditional love. He did not say a word as I approached him. He simply reached out and wrapped his strong, warm arms securely around my waist, pulling me close against his solid frame. I leaned into him, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his breathing. "We did it," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly, not from sadness but from an incredible, overwhelming rush of pure, radiant joy. "We did exactly what we needed to do." Nathaniel pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the crown of my head. "You were absolutely magnificent, Savannah," he murmured, his deep voice rumbling against my temple. "You took your power back completely on your own terms." Just as we stepped down from the stage together, a small, beautiful blur of midnight blue silk darted through the crowd of stunned, silent guests. It was Lily. She had been waiting safely with one of Nathaniel's trusted security guards near the main entrance of the ballroom, but she had clearly decided it was time to rejoin us. She sprinted across the polished hardwood dance floor, her dark curls bouncing with every single joyful step. "Mommy," she cheered, launching herself directly at me. I immediately crouched down, catching her safely in my arms and holding her tightly against my chest. Her sweet, familiar scent of strawberry shampoo instantly grounded me, completely erasing the lingering toxicity of the miserable people I had just left behind. I picked her up and balanced her effortlessly on my hip, standing tall and proud. She rested her little hands on my shoulders, giving me a bright, beautiful smile that completely illuminated the dim room. "Are we totally ready to go home now?" Lily asked, wrapping her small arms securely around my neck. I looked at Nathaniel, who offered a warm, gentle smile to our daughter. "Yes, sweetheart," I told her, kissing her soft cheek. "We are completely ready to go home." We turned our backs on the massive stage and began our final walk across the grand ballroom. The sea of wealthy elite guests immediately parted for us, creating a wide, clear path toward the towering exit doors. No one dared to speak a single word to us. They simply watched in absolute stunned silence as the billionaire chairman and his family calmly exited the venue. They had just witnessed a masterclass in absolute corporate destruction, and they knew better than to interfere with the people who held the true power in this city. As we walked through the opulent lobby of the Waldorf Astoria, I could clearly hear the distant wail of police sirens echoing through the busy downtown streets. The high-pitched sounds grew rapidly louder and significantly more intense with every single step we took toward the grand revolving doors. Derek was about to face the devastating reality of the federal justice system, and his deeply arrogant mother was about to watch her precious golden child get dragged away in cold metal handcuffs. Brittany was likely already running down Michigan Avenue, desperately trying to figure out how to survive without stolen corporate money to fund her fake, luxurious lifestyle. They had all completely lost everything they valued in a matter of fleeting minutes. They were locked in a prison of their own design, and I did not feel a single drop of pity for any of them. We stepped through the heavy glass doors and out into the cool, crisp Chicago night. The sudden rush of fresh evening air felt incredibly clean and invigorating against my skin. A large fleet of police cruisers with bright red and blue lights flashing violently was aggressively pulling into the circular driveway of the luxury hotel. Uniformed officers quickly piled out of their vehicles and rushed past us toward the lobby entrance, completely ignoring the quiet family of three calmly walking down the front steps. I watched the bright flashing lights paint the surrounding stone buildings in rapid bursts of vibrant color, and I finally allowed myself to take a deep, reflective breath. The long, difficult journey from that cold, sterile hospital room 7 years ago to this exact triumphant moment had been agonizingly painful. I had been forced to aggressively drag myself out of the darkest, deepest pit of absolute despair. I had spent years meticulously building my financial consulting firm, pouring every single ounce of my broken heart into my education and my demanding career. I did not just barely survive being violently thrown away like useless garbage by a highly arrogant man who promised to love me. I took that massive, cruel rejection and actively used it as the sturdy foundation to build an untouchable empire. I secured my own absolute financial independence so that no one could ever hold power over my life or dictate my worth ever again. And along that incredibly difficult path, I had found genuine true love. I found a brilliant, successful man who deeply respected my sharp mind, who actively championed my fierce independence, and who loved me with a fierce, unwavering loyalty that Derek could never possibly comprehend. I found my perfect equal partner in Nathaniel, and together we had created a beautiful, healthy family. As we reached our waiting private car, Lily reached her small hand out and happily grabbed Nathaniel's sleeve. "Daddy," she said brightly, "I want to get ice cream on the way home." Nathaniel chuckled warmly, opening the car door for us. "Anything you want tonight, my little princess?" he replied with a wide grin. I smiled brightly as I stepped into the back of the warm vehicle, completely leaving the bitter ashes of my past far behind me forever. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire experience is that your value is never determined by the people who walk away from you. When Derek left me in my darkest moment, he thought he was taking my entire future with him. He believed that my worth was entirely tied to his presence. But hitting rock bottom taught me that true power comes from within. You cannot control how toxic people treat you, but you absolutely control how you respond. Instead of letting betrayal break you, use it as the solid foundation to build an untouchable life. Financial independence and emotional boundaries are your strongest shields against those who try to drag you down. Never apologize for demanding respect, and never shrink yourself to make insecure people feel comfortable. True family is not always blood or the people you marry. It is the people who stand by you when you have nothing and celebrate you when you have everything. If you have ever survived a toxic relationship and built a better life from the ashes, I want to hear your story. Please leave a comment below sharing your journey. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about claiming your power and moving forward. Thank you for listening.